Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by 𝐿_Sovereign on AO3. Now, let's start. The gates served as bridges between dimensions. One fateful day, these gates appeared all around the world, unleashing monsters of various shapes and sizes. They seemed invulnerable to modern weaponry, not even tanks or missiles could harm them. They became known as villains. From the beginning, humanity faced an uphill battle. The gates were metaphysical and could not simply be sealed. The only way to close them permanently was to enter and defeat the boss villain. Some were powerful enough to dismantle entire squads of soldiers, while others could obliterate armies. However, bosses rarely left their gates, and the basic villains were already capable of wreaking havoc on humanity. Cities fell, and villains ran rampant. Governments were thrown into chaos, and the public teetered on the brink of anarchy, all within just 3 weeks. But then, everything shifted. The first of humanity's weapons emerged. Heroes, as they would come to be known, burst onto the scene. Each wielded quirks, powers that enabled them to confront the villains directly and emerge victorious. These powers varied from enhanced strength to the ability to unleash intense flames. While the relentless attacks from villains were gradually subdued, the number of hero casualties in those early days was staggering, prompting the establishment of a ranking system. Heroes, villains, and gates were assigned values, or ranks, to ensure that no hero faced more than they could handle. Unfortunately, not all heroes were equal, and I was a product of that system. I was the world's weakest E-rank hunter, lacking a unique quirk, and I found myself at the mercy of the world's most formidable dungeon, the Double Lair. I was on the brink of death, surrounded by villains. As my vision faded and I slipped into unconsciousness, I felt a gentle touch on my head, and from that moment, everything transformed. Upon waking, I discovered I was in a hospital, safe and endowed with my very own quirk, the system. This quirk presented a quest window that only I could see. By completing the quests assigned by this system, I could grow stronger and overcome the weakness that had held me back. My name is Izuku Midoriya, and this is the tale of how I became the world's most powerful hero. A report came in about a villain gate near Tatooine Station, where a giant had broken through the hero's defenses. These words ignited a thrill within Izuku Midoriya as he watched the crowd rush toward the scene. It wasn't the chaos of the villains that excited him, but rather the sight of heroes confronting them. It was a spectacle that captivated everyone, showcasing that humanity was not merely a target but a formidable force. However, while this was the explanation Midoriya shared, it was not the whole truth. Each takedown and display of heroic power provided him with a sense of satisfaction he struggled to find within himself. Like most of the population, Izuku was classified as an E-rank hero, but unlike many, he lacked a unique quirk. This made him stand out in a way that rendered him ordinary in the eyes of his peers. He did not possess the enhanced strength or regeneration typical of heroes. Midoriya was as weak as they came. If he were to confront even the weakest E-rank villains, it would require all his effort and a slide of luck to escape with his life. Defeating them was beyond his reach. For these reasons and more, he felt an irresistible pull toward every hero battle he could witness. Before he realized it, his legs were moving swiftly as he followed the crowd. As he approached the station, Izuku's gaze was drawn upward to a shark-headed villain wreaking havoc in the area. Behind it, he noticed the unmistakable signs of a gate, a swirling blue portal stretching 50 feet in all directions. Though Izuku was skilled at sensing the intricate energies emanating from the gate, he had seen enough to recognize the pattern. Its rotation speed and the duration of the particles indicated it was at least a low B rank, highly dangerous yet drawing hundreds of onlookers as if it were a common sight. Perhaps it was. Decades had passed since the first appearance of gates, and in modern times, society had grown accustomed to the phenomenon. Heroes were always stationed at gate entrances, ensuring that even if some villains managed to escape, they were typically subdued in mere moments. In this instance, Kamu Woods held the rear guard. His form was entirely unnatural, crafted from wood that moved fluidly like water. With roots extending from his body to ensnare the villain, 𝐒𝐿 hurriedly retrieved his latest notebook, nearly overlooking a second giant that joined the fray. With a mighty roar, Mount Lady, a hero endowed with the gigantification quirk, swung a colossal iron mace at the side of the villain's head, leaving a significant dent. 𝐒𝐿 winced, almost feeling sympathy for the creature, momentarily forgetting that it was a villain, an interdimensional monster whose sole purpose was destruction. Mount Lady was an A-rank hero. At the pinnacle of her abilities, it was not unreasonable to think that one strike could suffice to eliminate the threat. Indeed, as the villain crumpled to the ground, 𝐒𝐿 could see its still form. The sudden beeping of an alarm jolted 𝐒𝐿 from his concentration, and he glanced at his watch, his face paling as he realized he was running late. He despised the sensation of his current attire. His sweatshirt hung too loosely, and it took him a frustrating 2 minutes to tuck it into his too tight pants. These were his hero clothes, the only garments he owned that he could afford to lose. He often considered his form-fitting school uniform, which was far more comfortable. However, school uniforms were costly, and 𝐒𝐿 lacked the skill to repair them sufficiently to conceal the marks from previous encounters. As he approached a construction site, 𝐒𝐿 checked his phone to confirm that this was indeed the location of the D-rank gate. While professional heroes were officially licensed and supported by the government, granting them greater power and resources, it was not mandatory to be a pro-hero to clear gates. However, possessing a beginner's badge was essential, serving as identification that verified the holder's ability to make informed decisions about entering gates. 𝐒𝐿 grimaced at the memory that surfaced with that thought. It had taken him months of persuasion and clever maneuvering to obtain his own beginner's badge despite lacking a quirk. In truth, he should not have been able to acquire it at all. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out to him, causing him to flinch. He turned to see Momorozu, a striking girl who stood a good 7 centimeters taller than him. Her dark hair cascaded down her back as she worked to gather it into a large ponytail. 𝐒𝐿 struggled to avert his gaze. Every aspect of her seemed as if it had been sculpted by divine hands. Despite his best efforts to be respectful, he couldn't help but steal a glance, which filled him with embarrassment. Fortunately, Yorozu was too preoccupied with her preparations to notice his gaze. "I keep telling you, it's just Yorozu, or Yamomo. That's what my friends call me. Besides, we're the same age." 𝐒𝐿 bowed slightly, apologizing, "I'm sorry, Yorozu." She fought the urge to roll her eyes, recalling her father's admonishments about being unladylike. "What happened this time?" 𝐒𝐿 straightened up and scratched the back of his head nervously. "Oh, it just happened during some hero work." "Really? What actually happened?" 𝐒𝐿 sighed, knowing where this conversation was heading. As expected, he found himself sitting on a nearby piece of rebar with her while they awaited the arrival of the entire hero team. "You even went to a hospital." "Yeah," 𝐒𝐿 mumbled, a wave of embarrassment washing over him. "It was an E-rank, and I was the only one hurt." "How could you have gotten hurt that badly in a team?" In that moment, 𝐒𝐿 wished he could disappear. Here he was, sitting next to a stunning girl, and he was confessing his weaknesses. It felt humiliating, shameful, and utterly disheartening. "Midoriya." Yorozu's concerned tone pulled him back to reality, and he shook his head, trying to regain his composure. 𝐒𝐿 felt a bit embarrassed as he explained that he hadn't had a chance to grab coffee yet. He chuckled lightly, hoping to ease Yorozu's concern, but her expression only deepened with worry. He reassured her that he was fine, insisting it was nothing serious. Yorozu eventually nodded, shifting her focus away from him to ask about his aspirations. She wanted to know why he was so determined to become a hero. The change of topic led 𝐒� back to feelings of shame and disappointment. Earlier that day, their teacher had addressed the third-year students, urging them to consider their futures seriously. As he spoke, 𝐒� kept his head down on his desk, feeling the weight of his dreams. The teacher began distributing handouts, but then tossed the papers into the air, excitedly asking if they were all planning to enroll in the hero course. The class erupted in enthusiastic agreement, and 𝐒� timidly raised his hand along with them. Although he had already obtained a hero work permit, he aspired to rise above the rest and reach his idol, All Might. To achieve that, he needed to attend the best hero school. When the mention of UA High came up, Izuku noticed his classmates were focused on Katsuki Bakugo, who was boasting about his guaranteed acceptance into UA. Bakugo had always been confident, and it seemed unlikely that he would change. The teacher acknowledged Izuku's ambition to attend UA as well, prompting him to sink further into his desk, but the attention of his peers pulled him back up. They taunted him, claiming he couldn't get into UA's hero course just by studying. One classmate pointed out that a quirkless E-rank like him had no chance of admission. Izuku tried to interject, reminding them that the rule had been abolished, but Bakugo's explosive outburst sent him crashing into the wall. Bakugo shouted that Izuku would never amount to anything, suggesting he should just give up entirely. The teacher intervened, but it was clear that he had only done so after Bakugo had made his harsh point. With a smug grin, Bakugo returned to his seat, throwing a final insult at Izuku. In the present, Izuku reflected on Bakugo's words, contemplating whether he should just end it all. However, Yorozu's reassuring hand on his shoulder pulled him back from the dark thought. He remembered his responsibility to his mother and knew he couldn't leave just yet. Yorozu noticed he seemed distracted and quickly apologized for causing him discomfort with her question. Izuku waved off her concern with a bright smile, expressing that he wanted to be a hero simply for the joy it brought him. He joked that he would be bored without the excitement of the job. Yorozu seemed ready to say more, but their raid leader's enthusiastic call to action interrupted her. Izuku stood up, determination flooding through him as he clenched his fist. He was ready to prove his worth. Yorozu voiced her concern, warning him that if he continued to treat the situation lightly, he could end up in serious trouble. She used her unique quirk to create bandages, carefully wrapping them around his injuries after applying a healing potion. While she wasn't a healer in the traditional sense, her ability to create medical supplies and potions made her an invaluable member of any raid. Izuku shrugged, apologizing for his reckless behavior. Yorozu looked deeply into his eyes, expressing her worry about his fighting style. She questioned why he continued to put himself in danger without regard for his own safety. Izuku glanced at the small crystal in his hand, the villain core, which was likely the only reward he would receive from the raid. It was a small E-rank piece, barely enough to sustain him. He sighed, admitting that he simply wanted to be a hero and save people, recalling a memorable moment when a certain hero had rescued hundreds during a crisis. His reasoning was not entirely false. Izuku found joy in the idea of rescuing people from the villain gates that appeared without warning. However, that was merely a dream. Reality was different. In truth, Izuku pursued the path of a hero because it was the quickest way for someone like him to earn money, enabling him to support himself and cover his mother's medical expenses. Izuku disliked revealing this truth. He already felt weak and overwhelmed, and he did not want to add to his shame by asking for help. Kaito Otachi, the raid leader, called out to the group, urging their attention. With a jet-black katana resting on his shoulder, he projected the image of a seasoned warrior, despite his weathered appearance. He informed them that the boss was likely down a nearby tunnel since the gate had yet to close. As none of them were affiliated with any hero agencies, the decision to confront the threat was theirs alone. He acknowledged the cautious looks from his comrades and pointed out the danger involved, suggesting they could wait for more experienced heroes to handle the situation. However, he reminded them that doing so would significantly reduce their potential earnings. He proposed a vote among the 17 present, emphasizing that there would be no complaints after the decision was made. Two of Kaito's longtime friends quickly supported the idea, while two other heroes opposed it. As the votes were counted, it came down to Izuku and Yorozu. Yorozu hesitated, expressing her reluctance to proceed, her hand gripping her arm tightly. Kaito noted the tie, leaving only Izuku's vote to break it. All eyes turned to Izuku, who felt the weight of their gazes as he peered into the dark tunnel ahead. It was narrow and rough, likely housing a formidable villain ready to attack. Nevertheless, steeling his resolve, he met Kaito's gaze and declared his decision to join the mission. He reminded himself of his motivations, thinking of his mother and their shared struggles. Nervously wringing his hands, Izuku glanced at Yorozu, apologizing for putting her in this position by voting in favor. She reassured him, though her hidden eyes and tone suggested otherwise. Concerned, he questioned her well-being. Yorozu's frustration erupted, revealing her true feelings about the situation. She expressed her fears about the dangers they faced, emphasizing how close he had come to serious harm and questioning his decision to agree to the mission. Izuku muttered an apology, recognizing her concerns and feeling indebted to her. Yorozu sighed, concluding her outburst. She suggested that if he truly felt remorseful, he could repay her by sharing lunch together. Izuku was momentarily taken aback, and when Yorozu turned to face him, he was grateful for the darkness that concealed his blush. She playfully challenged him, pretending to be offended by his silence. He quickly clarified that it wasn't his intention to refuse her invitation. Kato interrupted their exchange, announcing that they had reached the boss's door. The entrance was tall, featuring 2 doors adorned with blue and gold trim. The handles were traditional, resembling large rings meant for pulling the doors open. Quietly, Kato's friends exchanged worried glances, sensing the danger ahead. Kato rallied the group, declaring it was time to move forward and earn their reward. He placed his palm against the door and pushed it open with ease. A chill ran down Izuku's spine, and for a brief moment, he considered retreating. However, the encouragement from the other heroes urged him onward. They reminded him of Kato's skill and experience, noting that if he were younger, he could have chosen any hero agency he desired. With their support, Izuku found himself stepping cautiously into the dimly lit room. As Kato prepared to cast a fireball for illumination, he was momentarily blinded by the sudden appearance of torches igniting with blue flames. Izuku marveled at the vast stone-walled chamber, which measured about 200 feet in diameter. Giant stone statues lined the edges, standing 5 feet apart. The focal point of the room was a massive throne at the back, occupied by a statue that dwarfed the others. It wore an unusual crown and appeared to be draped in robes reminiscent of ancient Greek senators. Izuku had never encountered anything like this before. He questioned whether they were still in a dungeon, but another member of the party dismissed the idea, insisting that the statues couldn't possibly be the enemies since there was nothing else around. Yorozu felt an unsettling sensation, drawing closer to Izuku as she expressed her discomfort, sensing an unseen presence watching them. Kato, trying to maintain morale, urged her not to speak like that, fearing it would frighten the others. Despite being the less experienced hero, Izuku found himself agreeing with Yorozu's unease. Suddenly, a shout broke the tension as one of the party members called out to Mr. Otachi, claiming to have discovered something intriguing. What he had found was another statue, hidden beside a massive figure at the back of the room. This statue depicted an angel of death, clutching a slab of engraved text in its skeletal hands. Yorozu quickly stepped forward, eager to demonstrate her knowledge unrelated to her quirk. She translated the text, revealing it to be the commandments of the Karthanan temple. As she recited the first commandment, Izuku felt a chill run down his spine, recalling the eerie sensation he had experienced earlier. He turned to see what appeared to be the eye of one of the larger statues moving. The second commandment followed, and Izuku squinted at the enormous carving, trying to glean more information. The third commandment warned that those who did not adhere to these rules would never return alive. The atmosphere shifted dramatically when a loud bang echoed through the temple, causing everyone to jump in surprise. Izuku's heart sank as he realized the door had slammed shut behind them. For a tense moment, silence enveloped the room, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. Then, a muscle-bound hero erupted in frustration, declaring that they should have never come here and that he would take the boss's treasure. He approached the door, reaching for the handles. Kato's voice trembled as he urged him not to touch it, his body tensing in alarm. The unsettling sound of stone grinding against stone filled the air, followed by a rush of wind. In an instant, their party member was gone, replaced by one of the stone statues, its mace now ominously stained. Yorozu gasped, her legs trembling as she processed the shocking turn of events. Izuku's mind raced as he realized that if one statue could move, the others might as well. He turned to face the king statue, which remained still, but its eyes glowed a fierce orange, locking onto him. Panic surged through Izuku as he vowed to abandon his beginner's badge if he ever made it out alive, recognizing that he had faced death far too many times for someone his age. He recalled moments of peril, from being separated from his party to narrowly escaping starvation, all of which had sharpened his instincts. In a protective instinct, he tackled Yorozu to the ground, shouting for the others to take cover. A blinding burst of heat and light erupted as beams of magical energy shot from the king statue's eyes, scorching the chamber floor. Though the attack lasted only seconds, it felt like an eternity to the party, pinned down by the overwhelming force. When the chaos subsided, Izuku pulled himself off Yorozu, who was trembling with her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her cheeks. He called out to her, concerned for her well-being, but was abruptly interrupted by a horrifying sight. A charred hand lay on the floor, the only remnant of the party member who had been struck. Kato shouted for everyone to remain down, ensuring they acknowledged his command before crawling toward Izuku, using only his right arm. Izuku was preoccupied with Yorozu's condition until Kato placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Kato explained that Yorozu struggled in high-stress situations, which was why she was limited to E or D rank dungeons, despite being an A rank hero. This place was far beyond that level, and they had survived thanks to Izuku's quick thinking. Kato looked at Izuku with disbelief, wondering why he had called out. Izuku shook his head, feeling embarrassed, and admitted that he had only sensed the danger. His gaze fell on Kato's left arm, where a bleeding stump was visible. Despite the situation, Kato managed a grin and asked for help to stop the bleeding. Izuku quickly tightened the bandages around Kato's remaining arm, stating that it was the best he could do for now. Kato then inquired about the rank of the creature they faced. Izuku hesitated, admitting he had never encountered anything tougher than a D-rank raid. Kato reflected on his own experiences, recalling that even in B-rank raids, he had never seen anything like this. He speculated that the creature might be A-rank or even S-rank. Izuku surveyed their surroundings and noted the ominous commandments inscribed, "Worship the Lord, praise the Lord, and prove your faith." He realized these were references to a deity. Looking into the creature's terrifying glowing yellow eyes, he concluded that it must be the god they referred to. Kato grimaced as he clutched his bleeding stump, expressing concern about the wound not stopping. Izuku acknowledged their limited options, reflecting on how they had initially thought 3 healers would suffice for a D-rank raid. 1 healer had been brutally killed, and another was too shocked to assist. Even an A-rank hero like Yorozu had been caught off guard. Kato suggested they wait for a chance to escape, though he acknowledged it wouldn't be easy. Suddenly, a young man, lean and athletic, crouched in a sprinter's position, declaring he wouldn't die there after finally signing with a big agency. Despite warnings, he launched himself forward with incredible speed, only to be struck down by a searing energy beam, leaving behind only his smoking feet. The king's judgment had been swift, reinforcing the urgency of their situation. While others panicked, Izuku focused on strategizing. He pondered why the creatures hadn't attacked them indiscriminately. They seemed to follow a pattern, only moving when someone approached or stood up. His attention shifted to the figure holding the commandment slab, realizing there were rules governing this place. Kato, confused, watched as Izuku stood up, urging him to stay down. But the determination in Izuku's eyes made Kato hesitate. He recognized that Izuku wasn't seeking death and reluctantly allowed him to proceed. As Izuku stood tall, the king's gaze turned toward him, its power glowing ominously. Before the creature could unleash its energy, Izuku dropped to the ground, and the glow faded, confirming his theory. Izuku called for everyone to bow down to the statue. Confusion and disbelief filled the air, with some questioning his sanity. Kato, however, began to understand, realizing that the king only attacked when someone stood too high. They needed to bow low enough to be safe, as the first commandment clearly stated to worship the Lord. Izuku reassured them that this was not just a hunch. He pressed his forehead against the cool stone bricks, and one by one, the others followed his lead, bowing as low as they could before the king's statue. Even Yorozu managed to bow, tears streaming down her face. Gradually, the yellow glow in the god's eyes faded, bringing a moment of relief to the surrounding heroes. But that relief quickly turned to horror as the statue's lips curled into a wide, sinister smile, the kind that could only be described as demonic. One man, emboldened by the moment, stood tall and asked if it was finally over. Wait. The atmosphere shifted as the crowd erupted in cheers, celebrating their survival. However, Izuku sensed an underlying danger. He knew the situation was far from over. As if responding to his thoughts, the statue began to stir, its hands gripping the armrests with such force that they cracked, while its feet dug into the floor, bending it under its immense weight. Panic surged through the crowd as one person exclaimed their disbelief. Kato quickly grabbed Izuku, shaking him from his daze and urging him for a solution. Izuku stammered, recalling the commandments, and mentioned the next one. The next one is to praise the Lord. Confusion filled the air as Kato questioned how they could possibly praise such a creature. A man with slicked back hair stepped forward, offering to try. He retrieved a cross from around his neck, revealing his past as a choir member. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes and began reciting a prayer. Izuku watched, uncertain, and asked if it was working. To his surprise, it seemed to slow the statue's movements. But then he realized the truth, exclaiming that they were praying to the wrong entity. Before anyone could react, the statue's massive foot came crashing down, leaving no chance for escape. Scatter! Izuku shouted as he grabbed Yorozu, pulling her away from the statue that had just claimed another victim. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed someone stopping at the chamber's edge, a stone soldier looming behind them. This should be safe, right? He called out, but a warning came too late, as the man was swiftly taken down. Izuku's mind raced as he processed their dire situation. They were trapped, surrounded by warriors and blocked from escape. Then a thought struck him: if the armed guards attacked when approached, perhaps the ones with instruments would react differently. He urged everyone to reach a statue with an instrument, hoping his idea would not lead to disaster. Kato was the first to reach one, and it began playing a solemn tune. Izuku realized that the statues with instruments did not attack. As others fell victim while navigating toward the musical statues, Izuku focused on his own survival. He and Yorozu reached a statue with drums, but it refused to play. Frustrated, he noticed the only difference was the number of people around each statue. Understanding that only one could safely sit at each, he urged Yorozu to stay put and sprinted away. His theory was confirmed when the steady drumbeat began, signaling her safety. He raced toward the final instrument, a harp. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over him, and instinct kicked in. He dove forward just as the giant's foot crashed down behind him, propelling him through the air and skidding across the ground. No, not that way, he thought, realizing he was sliding toward a warrior with only a shield. The giant's movement had thrown him off balance, leaving him vulnerable. Izuku dug his feet in, slowing his slide just as the shield came down, sending dust and debris flying and causing sharp pain to shoot up his leg. Though his body was battered, his determination remained unbroken. He crawled toward the final statue, each movement fueled by the longing to survive. He grasped the last thread of hope and pulled himself forward, collapsing just as the soft melodies of the harp began to play. The harmonious blend of instruments created a hauntingly appealing song, calming the wrath of the statue, which retreated to its seat, a sinister grin still etched on its face. As Izuku's vision faded, he focused on Yorozu, who was rushing toward him. Confusion washed over him as he noticed the BLD around him, realizing the extent of his injuries. Izuku regained consciousness within a minute, but during that brief moment, a new situation unfolded. Yorozu was doubled over, her hands pressed against her stomach, struggling to contain the BLD that escaped her lips. The toll of mana exhaustion was evident on her face. One of the remaining 6 members dismissed her condition, stating that at least she was alive, a fact that 11 others in their group could not claim. Kato glanced at his own injured arm and remarked that they now had 2 severely hurt individuals. Suddenly, Ryuji, Kato's old friend, turned hostile, accusing him of recklessness. He blamed Kato for their predicament, suggesting that if he hadn't rushed in, they wouldn't be in this situation. Kato acknowledged the truth of the statement, his spirit visibly diminished. He then resolved to take responsibility for their circumstances and made his way toward the altar, despite Izuku's desperate attempts to rise. Izuku protested, reminding them that they had all chosen to come here together and that blaming Kato now was cowardly. Despite his struggles, 𝐒𝐿 could not stand, while Kato approached the altar. A magical flame flickered to life around its edge. Kato looked back at 𝐒𝐿, questioning if this was indeed what they were meant to do. 𝐒𝐿, barely conscious, pondered the situation. He noted that the statues remained still, implying they might not approve of the offering. He then requested assistance to reach the altar. Ryuji was taken aback by the suggestion, but Kato reassured him that it would probably be fine, even though he lacked the strength to sound convincing. With the help of 2 companions, 𝐒𝐿 reached the altar and observed 3 more flames ignite around it. He turned to Kato and asked if they thought the heroes would come for them if they waited. Kato shook his head, explaining that the gate had been open for 7 days, and they would likely act before any reinforcements arrived. 𝐒𝐿 recalled a recent battle and realized that if these creatures were released into the world, it would lead to chaos. He urged Yorozu and Ryuji to join them, explaining that the trial would commence once all the flames were lit. After some hesitation, the remaining 6 members gathered at the altar, igniting the final flame and initiating the trial as 𝐒𝐿 had anticipated. Bright blue energy surged from the altar, creating flames that expanded outward. The energy flowed past the flames and enveloped the statues, transforming them into figures resembling futuristic robots. Then, the door creaked open. Kato shouted a warning, suspecting it was a trap. Suddenly, all the armed statues came to life, taking deliberate steps toward them. 𝐒𝐿, despite his dazed state, noticed something peculiar. Whenever he focused on a statue, it halted. He urged his companions to keep their eyes on the statues, gently lowering Yorozu's hands from her face and insisting they needed her focus as well. They formed a circle, backs against the altar, alternating their gazes between the statues to slow their advance. However, not everyone adhered to this strategy. In a moment of panic, a girl who had assisted 𝐒𝐿 suddenly dashed for the door, slipping past the advancing statues and making her escape. 𝐒𝐿 felt a surge of disbelief as he processed the situation unfolding around him. The door had closed slightly when Midoriya made it through, and the flames flickered, suggesting a connection to the number of people present. The blue flames continued to vanish, even though no one else had exited. 𝐒𝐿 shook his head, realizing the grim truth. It was a trap, a false hope. The final commandment required them to prove their faith and remain steadfast against temptations. If they could endure until the timer ran out, they would survive. Ryuji, who had helped 𝐒� reach the center of the room, suddenly turned pale. He expressed his regret, stating he could not stay any longer. In a rush, he dashed for the door, inadvertently knocking 𝐒� down as he made his escape. 𝐒� shouted with all his strength, warning everyone not to move. If anyone else left, they would not have enough people to observe the statues, and their fate would be sealed. Kato, growing increasingly anxious as the warriors drew nearer, called out to 𝐒𝐿, demanding to know what was happening. 𝐒𝐿 explained that they needed to survive until the blue flames disappeared, as those flames represented the timers. Once they were gone, victory would be theirs. Ryuji questioned the certainty of their situation, wondering if the door would close forever once the blue flames extinguished. 𝐒𝐿, uncertain, fell silent as the weight of the realization settled over him. Ryuji expressed his unexpected gratitude toward 𝐒𝐿, admitting he had previously underestimated him. He acknowledged that 𝐒𝐿's actions had kept him alive. However, tears streamed down Ryuji's face as he revealed his fear of dying, mentioning his family. The sound of a sword clattering to the ground was the only response 𝐒� could muster as he cried out for Ryuji to reconsider. Ryuji, as he crossed the threshold of the door, suddenly had a revelation. He urged 𝐒� and Yorozu to leave, explaining that as long as one person remained on the altar, the door would not fully close. He asked Yorozu to assist 𝐒� in reaching the door. Yorozu agreed to help but quickly found herself unable to move, her legs trembling beneath her. Kato, observing her condition, diagnosed her with mana exhaustion from overexerting herself to heal 𝐒�. Realizing the gravity of their situation, 𝐒� insisted that Kato take Yorozu and escape. Kato protested, declaring his intention to stay. 𝐒� pointed out that someone needed to help Yorozu, urging him to go. Yorozu, distraught, declared her longing to remain with 𝐒�. He attempted to lighten the mood, reminding her of their promise to eat together afterward. He handed her his 𝐂𝐵 villain core, telling her to eat without him and that she could repay him when they met again. Tears flowed freely from Yorozu as she pleaded with him, but Kato swiftly incapacitated her with a chop to the back of her neck. As he lifted her over his shoulder, Izuku asked him to take care of her. Kato, fighting back his own tears, promised he would and stumbled out the door just before it slammed shut behind him. Izuku found himself alone, contemplating his fate. He scoffed at the situation, wishing he had made better preparations. Gathering every ounce of strength he had left, he stood and picked up Ryuji's dropped sword, vowing to take at least one of the approaching statues with him. With the sword raised, he challenged the stone figures, inviting them to come for him. They responded immediately, and before he could catch his breath, a massive stone spear pierced his side, lifting him into the air and causing excruciating pain. As he collapsed onto the altar, Izuku experienced a level of agony he had never known, feeling as though acid coursed through his veins. He cried out, desperate to cling to life, expressing his own ties to family. He accused the others of cowardice for leaving him behind to face this fate alone. A scimitar loomed above him, threatening to end his life in one swift motion. In that moment, he wished for just one more chance to change his destiny. The sword descended upon him just as the last blue flame flickered out, and the world came to a standstill. A holographic screen appeared before Izuku, displaying the message that he had completed all necessary requirements of the secret quest titled Courage of the Weak. He stared at the screen, confusion washing over him as he read the next line. He had earned the right to become a player and was asked if he would accept. Panic surged through him as he questioned what was happening. Time was running out, and he was warned that if he refused, his heart would stop in mere moments. The urgency of the situation pressed upon him, and he made a decision. If accepting this offer meant he could avoid death, he would take the chance. With that, a bright light enveloped Izuku, and just as he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness, a gentle hand rested on his head. A sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced surged through him, and then the light consumed everything, leading him into a deep slumber. Izuku awoke with a gasp, sitting upright in bed, adrenaline coursing through his veins. His eyes darted around the unfamiliar room, searching for the statues that had attacked him, but instead, he found himself in a typical hospital setting. Tentatively, he reached beneath the blankets and, with trembling hands, threw them aside, expecting to see a missing leg. To his surprise, he found himself completely whole. Was it all just a dream? As he turned to gaze at the setting sun through the window, the door swung open, and two tall men entered, one with dark hair and the other with bleach-blonde locks. They casually strolled in, one of them remarking that it was about time he woke up, expressing doubt that he could wait another 3 days. Izuku was taken aback, realizing he had been asleep. For 3 days. The blonde man offered a half-smile and apologized for the surprise, explaining that they needed some answers. He handed Izuku a card, and both men settled onto a nearby couch. The card read Japan Hero Agency Inspectors, sending a chill through Izuku as he recognized them as government officials. He was too young to hold a beginner's license and not enrolled in any hero schools. He doubted they would overlook this. The blonde man tried to reassure him, stating that they had revoked his permit but that he would not face any charges. Izuku was left speechless. Wasn't it a serious offense to illegally obtain such identification? The man continued, acknowledging that Izuku had been through enough at his age. He expressed respect for anyone willing to risk their life for family. With a tired smile, he assured Izuku that he was not in trouble, they simply wanted to understand what had transpired. Finally breaking free from his daze, Izuku inquired about Miss Yorozu and Mr. Otachi. They would survive, the man explained, but the older gentleman's missing left arm would likely hinder his work, possibly leading to retirement. As for Yorozu, she was still receiving care for her mental trauma, and the doctors were uncertain about her future. The man scratched his cheek, mentioning other heroes like Ryuji. Izuku felt a wave of emotion wash over him, unable to shake the image of Ryuji fleeing the scene, leaving others behind. The man nodded, and his partner took over the conversation, revealing that only 6 heroes had survived the double dungeon. While heroes risked their lives every time they entered a gate, a tragedy of this magnitude had not occurred in a long time, thanks to the ranking system and the healers typically present in most raid parties. This warranted a significant investigation. However, upon entering the dungeon, both the Inspector Agency and the Hunter Agency found nothing but Izuku lying on the altar, with all the statues mysteriously absent. That seemed impossible to him. They had thought so too. If any testimonies had differed even slightly, or if they hadn't found some of the deceased's body parts, they would have formed a different theory. As it stood, they believed Izuku might have experienced a double awakening within that gate. A double awakening was a rare phenomenon. Most of the world's population could be classified as heroes, receiving their awakening at birth or later in life, granting them enhanced abilities. A select few, however, experienced a double awakening, with stories of C ranks jumping to A rank or B ranks ascending to S rank. They needed him to place his hand on a reader. If his mana exceeded what was recorded on his revoked license, it would confirm that he had undergone a secondary awakening. Izuku nodded and, with some hesitation, placed his hand on the purple crystal while the man held up a reader. The gem emitted a faint glow for a few seconds, and the man frowned at the reader. Izuku inquired about the results. The man explained that they had been mistaken in their suspicions. The two men gathered their belongings and apologized for the disturbance, wishing him luck on his recovery before leaving him alone with his thoughts once again. Izuku pondered whether this meant they couldn't see what he was experiencing as he gazed at the holographic screen. You have unread mail. He wondered how to use the device, having tapped at it for about 10 minutes without success. It seemed it wasn't a touchscreen. He thought aloud about possible commands, trying read mail and open inbox. Suddenly, the screen flashed, and Izuku felt a surge of excitement at his success. It indicated that this was not merely a hallucination. Whatever this was, it was real. The system will assist the player's growth. Failure to follow the system's orders may result in a penalty. Your rewards have arrived. Izuku found the situation strange as he sat in bed, reviewing the messages. Daily quest, preparing to become strong, has arrived. Unread. He decided to check it. The screen vanished, replaced by a long list of objectives. Incomplete push-ups 0, 100 incomplete curl-ups 0, 100 incomplete squats 0, 100 incomplete running 0, 10-kilometer warning. Failure to complete this daily quest will result in a punishment associated with this quest. Izuku smiled, thinking it was a joke. He felt that someone in the hospital lacked the energy for such tasks. He resolved to look at it later, flopping back onto his bed, planning to rest first. Unbeknownst to him, as he slept, the clock displayed at the bottom of the quest changed colors, transitioning from green to yellow to red as time passed. Eventually, the timer expired, and a soft ringing noise filled his ears, waking him from his slumber. As he opened his eyes, he was jolted by a sudden tremor. He found himself not on a mattress but on a sandy dune. Confused, he realized he was in a desert and felt a shadow looming over him. Turning his head slowly, he encountered a massive six-eyed centipede. Above the creature, he read the words, "Poison Fang Giant Sand Centipede." His eyes widened as another window appeared before him. Penalty quest, survive. Goal, survive until time runs out. Time required, 4 hours. Time remaining, 3 hours, 59 minutes, and 57 seconds. He couldn't believe the situation he was in. The creature roared, prompting him to flee for his life. Izuku struggled to focus on the time, too preoccupied with evading the giant centipedes that pursued him across the sandy plains. Time lost its meaning as adrenaline fueled his escape. Breathing heavily, he wondered how much longer he could sustain his pace, with the centipedes nearly at his heels. Every muscle in his body cried out for relief, but he had none to offer. Taking one last glance back, he saw the nearest creature just inches away. He let out a final scream of defiance before collapsing onto the hospital floor, covered in sand. On his hands and knees, trembling from exhaustion, he looked up. You have completed the penalty quest. Your rewards for the penalty quest have arrived. Would you like to accept? Izuku barely had time to read the screens and mutter a confused response before his body succumbed to unconsciousness once more. 4 days later, nurses observed from the windows as Izuku Midoriya ran around the hospital perimeter, his shirt drenched in sweat. One nurse wondered how long he had been running and if he should be resting. Another nurse replied that doctors believed active heroes recovered faster, so he would likely be fine. As he reached the hospital courtyard, Izuku finally collapsed onto a nearby bench, having completed his 10 kilometers running goal. He smiled as his system windows appeared, displaying rewards for his daily quest, an inventory for his items, and a status screen showing his stats. He murmured to himself, likening it to a game, careful not to attract the attention of those nearby. Upon waking from his run in the desert, Izuku quickly discovered that the daily quests had granted him 3 rewards: status recovery, 3 stat points, and 1 random gift box. He eagerly accepted the status recovery first, feeling as if he had never experienced fatigue or injury at all. Initially, the random gift box had provided him with a key, but subsequent rewards were merely small trinkets like pens, which he found rather disappointing compared to the stat points or status recovery. He could enhance his strength, vitality, agility, intelligence, and sense with the stat points he earned. So far, Izuku had allocated all 12 points he received from the daily quests into strength. While the difference was subtle, he was aware that it was positively impacting his stamina. He raised his eyebrows while examining the description of the key he had received, contemplating whether to give it a try. The item was identified as a dungeon key, classified as E rank. It was a key that permitted the creation of an instance dungeon, usable at the 3rd entrance of Tatooine Station. Taking a day off from the hospital turned out to be easier than Izuku had anticipated. He had prepared to argue with a nurse about his readiness, but to his surprise, she simply smiled and granted him permission, wishing him luck with his endeavors. Within half an hour, he found himself at the subway entrance, the grass green key in hand. He pondered the implications of instance dungeons, inventory, and stat points, questioning whether this was part of a double awakening or merely a precursor to it. A smirk crossed his face as he imagined the weakest E-rank hero achieving a double awakening, which would surely amuse some people. Adopting a serious expression, he readied the key, confident in his ability to escape if things became too perilous. With determination, he moved the key into the air, blue lightning crackling around him as a blue gate materialized. He stepped through, resolute in his quest for strength. Izuku paused for a moment, considering the energy swirling before him, before stepping forward and crossing the threshold into the dungeon. As he did, he heard a sound reminiscent of water freezing. Turning around, he watched as the gate transformed from its swirling form into a solid, bright blue wall. He struck the wall with his fist, discovering it was as solid as it appeared. He called out, hoping to attract attention, but no one responded. The sound of heels clicking on concrete caught his attention, and he turned to see a girl ascending the stairs toward him. Concerned that he might have trapped a stranger, he asked if she was okay. However, she ignored him, walking straight through the wall as if it were non-existent. He wondered if he had entered another dimension. A warning echoed in his mind: he could not exit the dungeon without defeating the boss or using a hearthstone. Panic washed over him as he realized that just a week prior, he had struggled with E-rank dungeons, and now he was expected to clear a dungeon alone. With each passing moment, his nerves frayed further. He had been wandering through the subway station for about 15 minutes, with no sign of life around him. The subway was no longer the vibrant underground railway he remembered from his previous visits to Tatooine Station. Instead, it appeared abandoned and dilapidated, reminiscent of a post-apocalyptic setting. He lamented his decision to come here as a foul odor filled the air, reminiscent of wet dog multiplied 100-fold. Suddenly, every instinct in Izuku's body screamed at him to move. Unable to identify the source of danger, he dove forward just in time to avoid a loud metallic snap that echoed behind him. Quickly regaining his composure, he turned around, his eyes widening at the sight of a massive red wolf that had emerged from an alleyway. Its mouth was surrounded by steel, with silver fangs protruding among its gleaming white teeth. It had a name. Most villains were known by nicknames or titles assigned by heroes, such as giants, goblins, or slimes, depending on their mutations. However, Izuku had never encountered a villain with a specific name, especially one that resembled a wolf so closely. He questioned whether this was a genuine villain or a creation of the system tailored for him. Perhaps it was related to the fact that this was a special dungeon. As he assessed the creature, he noticed the name hovering above its head was colored red. It captured his attention momentarily before he snapped back to reality. Its name meant nothing if he couldn't defeat it. As the wolf's fur bristled, Izuku felt an overwhelming fear grip him, rendering his legs immobile. He thought to himself that he couldn't move. The wolf lunged forward, its metallic jaws poised to snap shut. The sudden movement jolted Izuku into action, and he managed to sidestep the creature, narrowly avoiding its powerful grip that had been aimed at his head just moments before. Stumbling backward, he realized the wolf was relentless. Before he could formulate a plan, it lunged again, its jaws coming perilously close to his face. In that instant, Izuku's instincts kicked in. He placed his palms against the wolf's body and propelled himself off like a gymnast. Flipping through the air, he landed in a one-handed handstand before pushing off and landing on his feet. However, the momentum carried him forward, causing him to roll onto his back and crash against the wire gate of a dilapidated storefront. He noted how light his body felt. Planting both hands firmly on the ground, he looked at the wolf from his inverted position and pushed off, launching into the air to land just beside the wolf's face. With his fist clenched, Izuku felt an unprecedented surge of power coursing through him. He thought about how he had just regained his life and refused to lose it so easily. His strike was so swift and powerful that he could hardly comprehend it. All he knew was that his punch sent the wolf flying through the air, crashing into another storefront. Izuku stood in shock, completely bewildered. The sudden power surging through him felt electrifying, liberating, and intoxicating. As the wolf, mostly unscathed, pulled itself from the wall, Izuku wasted no time charging forward to deliver another quick uppercut. This time, however, the wolf was prepared, and Izuku had to bring his left fist down on its head to avoid a retaliatory bite. The exhilaration from his newfound power began to fade as he realized that, despite his increased strength, his punches alone would not be enough to defeat his foe. With no backup or healers, he declared that he had something else. Reaching forward, he activated his inventory. His hand plunged into the glowing screen, feeling the cool leather grip of a steel sword as he grasped for his salvation. Withdrawing the magical sword Ryuji had wielded in the double dungeon, Izuku swung forward, cleaving the airborne wolf in two, which collapsed behind him. He received a notification that he had defeated Steel Fang Raikan and leveled up. He recalled overhearing Ryuji mention that he had purchased the sword for a hefty sum. Though he felt he could never afford it, he decided that for now, he would make use of it, especially as the ominous growls of the steel fangs echoed around him. Izuku rested against a pillar, reviewing his status screen, with 3 defeated wolves lying nearby. He noted that every time he leveled up, all his stats increased by 1, plus the 3 stat points earned from the daily quest. He pondered that hunting villains and leveling up would be the most effective way to earn points. Looking at his strength, he realized that, thanks to leveling and daily quest points, it had only increased by 10 points. Yet, he felt significantly stronger with 20 points than he had with 16. This led him to conclude that the growth must be exponential. He shrugged to himself and stood, feeling reassured that even someone like him could become stronger. A dozen pairs of glowing red eyes emerged from the shadows, and Izuku smiled, feeling unafraid. After all, he had already faced death once before. He refused to back down. Waves of steel fangs appeared before him. With his sword, he slashed and struck, watching as they fell before him. He leveled up again. He moved with a speed he had never experienced before. He leveled up once more. His strength felt unparalleled. And this was more chaos than he had ever witnessed in his life. He gained the title of Wolf Slayer, which would grant him increased stats when fighting beast-type villains. The ground was strewn with the remnants of his foes, each one defeated and incapacitated. As he searched through their bodies, Izuku finally understood why he hadn't found any villain cores in the previous wolves. Instead of cores, they dropped items, reminiscent of an RPG game. Izuku opened his inventory to assess his collection so far. He had gathered 34 wolf fangs, traveler's clothes, 2 worn daggers, and most importantly, a hearthstone. With the option to escape the dungeon, Izuku felt significantly safer. However, as he held the softly glowing stone in his hand, he weighed the advantages and disadvantages of leaving. On one hand, he was alone, and his blade was starting to show signs of wear. On the other hand, this opportunity to level up might not come again. He placed the Hearthstone back into his inventory and accidentally opened a different tab. He discovered a store and smiled, realizing it had a wide variety of items. He received a prompt asking if he would like to sell all 34 wolf fangs for 680 gold. The idea of gold intrigued him. Although he wasn't sure if the fangs had other uses, he was aware that in games like this, they often did. As a teenager with limited funds, the thought of converting this gold into real currency was appealing. He decided to sell 17 of the fangs. After receiving 340 gold, he checked the purchasing side of the store, only to be met with a message stating that he was not at a high enough level to access the shop. He chuckled to himself, appreciating the politeness of the message, and hefted his sword onto his shoulder as he ventured deeper into the special dungeon. With each encounter, every attack became slightly easier. Izuku found himself thinking of this dungeon as a game. Unlike typical dungeons, the villains respawned and continued to charge at him, allowing him to learn their patterns. Leaning on his sword to catch his breath, he sensed a presence above him and another to his right. He noted the positions of the enemies, recognizing the monkey above and the cat to the right. Changing his grip on the sword, he pulled it from the ground and spun it around, allowing the monk-like villain to fall onto the blade as he slashed diagonally downward, swiftly defeating the cat before it even realized he was moving. He received a notification that he had leveled up. Observing a bisected wolf, he noted that its name tag had changed from deep orange to white. He speculated that perhaps the enemies were too weak for him now, no longer providing the experience he needed to level up. Despite his current strength, he expressed doubt about facing whatever awaited him below. Goosebumps spread across his skin as he gazed down the dark staircase, certain that the boss awaited him. Knowing his sword was nearing its limit and that his growth had slowed, he decided to at least take a look at the boss before making a final decision to engage or teleport away. As he descended the seemingly endless stairs, he wondered if he was really at Tatooine Station, contemplating the possibility of ending up on the other side of the world. His curiosity was soon satisfied when the passage opened up to a spacious subway boarding platform. However, like the rest of the dungeon, it was in ruins, with water filling the subway tracks, obscuring a dark shape from his view. In an instant, he raised his sword to defend against the figure that burst from the water, crashing into him and sending him against a nearby pillar. He tasted blood from the impact. Falling onto the ground, Izuku gasped for breath, his eyes widening at the sight of his damaged blade. He had tried to block or slice through the attack, but it had proven too much for the worn weapon. Now, only about a third of the blade remained, jagged at the edges. He thought he had grown stronger, but the enemy's name still appeared in orange. He faced the massive cobra snake, which hissed loudly, its body towering over him. Holding his sword like a dagger, he stared down the beast, acknowledging it as the final boss. With determination, he told himself that he just needed to defeat one more enemy before he could finally rest. Gathering all his energy, he propelled himself forward, dragging the stub of his blade along the snake's middle section, only to produce a metallic scraping sound and sparks. Growling in response, Izuku put all his effort into striking several more times, moving along the length of the creature to avoid its attacks. Unfortunately, this strategy only lasted a brief moment. Rasaka grew weary of the persistent human scratching at his sides and swiftly pivoted, slamming the hero to the ground, then to the side, and back to the ground again. Izuku felt his old wounds reopen as the scales grazed him repeatedly, draining more of his life force with each passing moment. He pondered how much longer he would have to endure, yearning to escape the label of the weakest. With determination, he parried Rasaka's fangs with his own blade, narrowly avoiding the large drops of poison that threatened to fall. Izuku cursed the concept of strength, lamenting that no matter his intelligence or wealth, it all meant nothing in the face of raw power. He stood once more, discarding his broken blade, declaring that he had come to become strong and shed the title of weakest. As the boss slithered toward him cautiously, Izuku opened his fists, preparing to grapple barehanded. He thought of his classmates, particularly Bakugo, and his friends, with Yorozu at the forefront of his mind. Anger surged through him as he recalled how others looked down on him, some with pity, others with scorn, and some even embarrassed by his presence. Fueled by rage, he declared that compared to the statue, Hrosaka was nothing and did not scare him at all. Hrosaka roared in response, lunging forward to engulf Izuku, but he found only empty air. Unbeknownst to Hrosaka, Izuku's only skill before his reawakening had been his ability to dodge and run. From his position in the snake's blind spot, Izuku wrapped his arms around its neck, digging his fingers in as deeply as he could. He had invested all his points into strength, and he was confident he could defeat Hrosaka with nothing but his bare hands. Hrosaka began to thrash as Izuku's immense pressure constricted his windpipe. The creature dragged its body against the subway walls, attempting to shake the young hero loose, but the lack of oxygen was debilitating. Izuku screamed in frustration, urging Hrosaka to succumb. The walls trembled as the roars of the two warriors echoed throughout the subway. In a different setting, a nurse and a doctor discussed Izuku's absence. The doctor expressed concern about the late hour, questioning if Izuku had returned yet. The nurse reassured him, noting that they planned to discharge him the next day. The doctor, however, remained skeptical, recalling the severe conditions in which many heroes returned, often more injured than those from serious accidents. He remarked on the miraculous nature of their survival, while the nurse pointed out that even the weakest heroes possessed superhuman abilities. Suddenly, notifications appeared, indicating that Izuku had leveled up multiple times. Breathing heavily, Izuku's exhaustion transformed into a relieved laugh as he sat against Hrosaka's still form, realizing he had grown stronger. He acquired a new weapon, Hrosaka's scales, a powerful gauntlet with impressive attack power. The gauntlets fit him perfectly, their strength surpassing even Ryuji's broken sword. Hrosaka had also dropped a pouch containing venom, but Izuku set it aside, too fatigued to examine it further. Standing up, he watched as the ruined subway around him transformed back into the cleaner, more modern Tatooine station. A smile crept onto his face at the sight of his home world, but something felt amiss. The station was completely empty. It was late, but not too late. He wondered where everyone had gone. Upon reaching the subway exit, emerging into darkness and rain, he encountered a member of the JDF. The soldier questioned why Izuku was still out there and if he had not heard the broadcasts. Concern etched on the soldier's face, Izuku responded with his own question, asking what had happened. The soldier hesitated, then pointed to Izuku's shattered sword and armored gauntlets, asking if he was a hero. Izuku felt a wave of anxiety wash over him for a moment. His license had been revoked due to his age and the questionable methods he had used to obtain it. However, he quickly composed himself, realizing that this ordinary soldier would have no reason to doubt his response. His weapons and tattered clothing would serve as convincing evidence, prompting him to nod and affirm, acknowledging the situation. The soldier immediately straightened up, eager to assist. He expressed his willingness to guide Izuku, who raised an eyebrow in response, still puzzled by the unfolding events. As Izuku continued to navigate through the devastated city, he was taken aback by the extent of the destruction. Vehicles and buildings lay in ruins, scattered across the landscape, remnants of battle evident. Everywhere. A gate had opened, as the soldier explained. The smaller threats had been dealt with, leaving only one larger villain remaining. Izuku was already aware of this. To his surprise, he could sense the presence of the villain in the air, detecting a denser concentration of mana compared to the other villains around. He was certain that this was the boss. After a brief 5 minutes, the sounds of combat reached his ears. The clash of metal against stone, cries for healing, and tactical commands filled the air. One voice stood out among the chaos, demanding action from a supposed A-rank hero, expressing frustration at their inaction. Peering over the crowd surrounding the battle with the golem villain, Izuku spotted Yorozu at the back of the group, visibly trembling, not from the cold, but from fear. He was surprised that she had returned to hero work, realizing that her license must not have been revoked. However, he quickly shifted his focus back to the fight, his eyes widening as the golem seized a chunk of rock from its own body and hurled it toward the support team. While two healers managed to evade the projectile, Yorozu remained frozen, unable to move. The rock filled her vision, and she collapsed, losing consciousness. While her teammates stood in shock, Izuku acted instinctively, moving before he fully processed the situation. In a flash, he scooped Yorozu into his arms and dashed past the ongoing battle, stopping just behind the crowd. He gently set her down and checked her pulse and breathing, relieved to find her stable. With a sense of urgency, he retrieved his broken sword and stepped back, ensuring no one was watching. Once satisfied, he gripped the sword tightly, positioning it like a spear. With a determined stance, he threw the blade with all his strength. It soared through the air, striking the golem's head with incredible force, causing it to crumble. Izuku was astonished that, even at a low level, he had managed to defeat the creature in a single blow. He quickly dismissed the thought and prepared to leave, but the sight of Yorozu lying on the ground halted him. He hesitated, recalling the dismissive attitudes of the other heroes, which resonated with his own past experiences. Trusting them was not an option. Lifting Yorozu was effortless, and he made his way into the night, seeking a hospital for refuge. 3 days had passed since the encounter with Risaka, and Izuku was working out in his hospital room, sweat dripping from his brow as he completed his push-ups. The nurses had reassured him that Yorozu just needed rest and would be fine. He suspected she wouldn't even remember that he was the one who had brought her back. That suited him just fine. Any further explanation would be unnecessary. As he finished his 100th push-up, a gentle knock came at the door. He quickly stood up to put on his shirt, but it was too late. The young nurse was already captivated by his physique. She apologized profusely, flustered by the unexpected sight. Izuku offered her a warm smile, assuring her it was no trouble at all. She then inquired if he was being discharged that day, to which he enthusiastically confirmed, expressing his eagerness to leave the hospital. However, the nurse was too busy handing over her phone to notice his excitement. She shyly asked if she could have his number, to which he responded with confusion, wondering if there were test results she needed to send him later. As he handed back the phone, he noticed the deep blush on her cheeks and realized the implication of her request. He scratched the back of his head, surprised by how much he had changed. He hadn't spent much time in front of a mirror lately, but he could tell he looked different. To him, he had merely grown taller, but to others, he appeared more like a young man who had matured significantly. With a mix of surprise and shyness, he acknowledged the change, realizing that his appearance had transformed more than he had anticipated. Izuku found himself pondering whether she was aware of his age. He expressed his gratitude and bid her farewell while he began to gather his belongings. Suddenly, a wave of anxiety washed over him as he thought about the possibility of her calling him. He felt a surge of panic, wondering what he would do if that happened. His sister, Sakura, noticed his distress and teased him about his time at the hospital. Izuku smiled down at her, reassuring her that he had merely been working out during his recovery. Sakura's concern grew as she looked at her brother, who seemed different from the Izuku she knew. He urged her to hurry up, reminding her that she would be late for her first day of summer school. He tossed her backpack to her, but she stumbled backward trying to catch it, prompting him to apologize. Sakura, who shared a similar height with Izuku before his transformation, had dark black hair, which seemed to reflect more of their father's traits. They had been told this before their mother fell into an eternal sleep. As he waved goodbye to his 12-year-old sister, he sighed, hoping she would get along well with her classmates. Despite being a perfect student, Sakura was determined to excel academically, even if summer cram school seemed unnecessary for her. Izuku's thoughts drifted to his own physical changes. He examined his arms, realizing that a few weeks of exercise couldn't account for his transformation. He speculated whether the system or his stats were responsible for his newfound strength. He shook his head, imagining himself as an overly muscular figure, and hoped that wouldn't be his fate. He settled onto the couch and scrolled through his phone, noting that the UA entrance exam was just 2 months away. He wondered if he would be strong enough by then. At level 18, his stats were as follows: Strength, 48 Vitality, 27 Agility, 27 Intelligence, 27 Sense, 27 with 12 points to distribute. He decided to allocate 8 to Agility, 2 to Strength, and 2 to Sense. Just as he began to relax, his phone rang loudly, interrupting his moment of peace. He sighed, wishing for a brief respite, and answered the call. On the other end, the landlord's voice boomed, expressing frustration at the delay in Izuku's response. Izuku explained that he had been hospitalized, which the landlord acknowledged but reminded him that rent was still due. 𝐒𝐿𝐵 assured him that he would make the payment soon and hung up, pacing his small apartment. He contemplated the implications of being a reawakened person, realizing he could potentially earn more money. However, he was also aware of the reputation he had as the world's weakest, which made him cautious about taking on high-rank dungeons. The next day felt strangely familiar as 𝐒𝐿𝐵 approached a construction site, ready to join other heroes in clearing a gate. This time, it was a C-rank dungeon, and he was no longer the weak boy he had been just over a week ago. A burly man at the front of the group waved him over, and 𝐒𝐿𝐵 returned the gesture with a smile, though he felt a chill as a warning from the system flashed in his mind: beware of lizards. Ignoring the warning, he stepped forward to greet the raid leader. When they shook hands, he was surprised by the man's gentle grip, as if he were afraid of hurting him. ♁introduced himself and confirmed 𝐒𝐿𝐵's E-rank status. For a moment, 𝐒𝐿𝐵 hesitated, tempted to claim he was stronger, but he chose to remain honest. He heard some snickers and jeers referring to him as the weakest hunter, but ♁quickly silenced them, placing a reassuring hand on 𝐒𝐿𝐵's shoulder. He explained that while 𝐒𝐿𝐵 would not be fighting, he could earn 200,000 yen for carrying equipment and fulfilling their member requirement, presenting it as a fair deal. 𝐒𝐿𝐵 smiled and promptly signed the contract. He was currently navigating a tricky situation. His hunter's license had been revoked due to his age, forcing him to seek work outside of any direct agency distribution. It was inconvenient, but preferable to facing further trouble. With middle school behind him and high school just around the corner, 𝐒𝐿𝐵 had little else to occupy his time than searching for this kind of work. He pondered the possibility of applying for an early license, especially since he planned to enroll in UA. Hero schools were not solely for obtaining licenses; anyone aged 18 or older could do that. These institutions trained the strongest future heroes in harnessing their quirks and awakened abilities to save people, whether in dungeons or elsewhere. Even now, there were those who misused their powers for criminal activities, branded as villains alongside the monstrous foes that emerged from gates. Hero schools also provided students with opportunities to connect with higher-ranked agencies through events like sports festivals and villain hunting competitions. Consequently, places like UA were highly coveted, but only the most exceptional candidates could gain entry. A cheerful voice broke through his thoughts, assuring him that they, as newcomers, needed to support one another. 𝐒𝐿𝐵 turned to see a teenager not much older than himself, clad in shiny armor. This young man introduced himself as Akira, a D-rank, and promised to protect 𝐒𝐿𝐵. 𝐒𝐿𝐵 felt a mix of amusement and disbelief, wondering how someone at D-rank could possess such impressive gear. Before he could inquire further, ♁interjected, clarifying that the equipment consisted mainly of provisions, first aid materials, and some mining tools, nothing overly burdensome. 𝐒𝐿𝐵 raised an eyebrow at the mention of first aid. Curious, he asked if they had a designated healer. ♁shrugged, explaining the difficulty of securing a healer for an attack force, as healing quirks were rare. With a bright smile, he declared it was time to begin. 𝐒𝐿𝐵 was surprised to discover that ♁, despite his imposing stature, was a mage class. He realized he shouldn't judge appearances. Mr. Otachi was also a mage but carried himself like a swordsman. Upon entering the gate, ♁conjured a floating ball of light that illuminated the cavern. Confusion spread among the heroes as they noted the absence of villains and light sources, which were typically present in dungeons. 𝐒𝐿𝐵 wanted to urge them to be quiet as he activated his sense stat. He understood that villains also required light to see, and if they had managed to eliminate all other sources, it could indicate a strategic advantage. Suddenly, he heard a sound. It was a Nomu-type nest. 𝐒𝐿𝐵 shouted that the monstrous villains were above them as the ominous pounding of countless creatures echoed around them. The party, including 𝐒𝐿𝐵, rushed deeper into the dungeon to evade the descending black figures. ♁ commanded the mags to bring them down while instructing the tanks to draw their attention. 𝐒𝐿𝐵 watched in awe at their seamless teamwork, realizing that their coordination eliminated the need for a healer. He shook his head, dismissing the troubling thought that if they had fought like this in the double dungeon, nothing would have changed. Returning his focus to the battle, he observed the villains being taken down with ruthless efficiency. While everyone was performing admirably, Izuku sighed as a smaller black creature lunged at him with claw-like hands. The D-rank monster was caught off guard and swiftly dispatched. He noted that the team wasn't prioritizing the protection of their porter, which he didn't require, but they were unaware of that. Perhaps it related to the warning the system had given him earlier. Within 10 minutes, the horde was defeated, and the group began extracting villain cores from the fallen creatures. As the others worked, Natsuo turned to Izuku, expressing gratitude for his timely warning about the approaching threat. Izuku shrugged, feeling an instinctive awareness. He noted that Natsuo had some sharp senses and turned away as another mage called for him. It was reassuring that everyone was safe thanks to his efforts, but Natsuo advised him not to worry too much about the little things. Izuku squinted and tilted his head, pondering Natsuo's words about not stressing the small stuff. While Natsuo and a few party members examined one of the Nomu remains, a chill ran down Izuku's spine. He scanned the area, relieved to find no more Nomus, but the unsettling feeling was emanating from his companions. He leaned closer to one clad in expensive armor, warning him to be cautious. The armored mage looked confused, prompting Izuku to elaborate that if the equipment was as costly as it appeared, it was wise to stay alert. Izuku had always trusted his instincts, especially when it came to sensing danger. Even before his reawakening, he had a knack for it. Yet, he found himself questioning why he continued with this group despite sensing their potential threat. Was it the lure of cash? An addiction to danger? Or perhaps a deeper instinct urging him toward an opportunity? These thoughts swirled in his mind during their lunch break. It was frustrating not to understand his own motivations, but he maintained a calm demeanor as they resumed their journey. Suddenly, Natsuo halted, causing one of the smaller members to bump into him, resulting in a minor mishap. Natsuo then conjured a ball of light, illuminating a scene that would unsettle anyone with a fear of spiders. Numerous Nomu were suspended in webbed cocoons, partially devoured. Thankfully, the creature responsible was nowhere in sight. Natsuo declared it was definitely the boss room. Izuku felt an energy in the hallway that reminded him of Risaka, but even more intense. After a few minutes of navigating the metallic corridor, they spotted the faint glow of bright blue mana crystals. Upon entering the cavern, they were nearly blinded by the dazzling crystals adorning the walls. Natsuo estimated their value at nearly 5 million yen, prompting a playful comment from another party member about making Natsuo's younger brothers envious. Natsuo responded with a light-hearted reprimand, but he quickly shifted focus to the task at hand. He pointed to the back of the cavern, where a massive spider rested in its web. Since a gate would close once the boss was defeated, Natsuo suggested they mine the crystals before confronting the creature. He asked Ren if he had brought the mining equipment. Ren expressed surprise at the treasure hidden in a C-rank dungeon. Natsuo, undeterred, proposed that 2 members stay behind to guard while the others fetched the mining tools. Akira readily agreed, confident that the spider would remain undisturbed. Natsuo smiled, assuring them they would return quickly. As the 8 members of the party left, Akira leaned against a wall, preparing for their wait. However, the wait was short-lived, an explosion echoed, and the exit was soon blocked by a cascade of rocks. Izuku realized the identity of the lizards and dropped his pack, understanding that he had anticipated this all along. He knew he couldn't act too soon, or they would be ready to strike. As he assessed the cave-in, he recognized that clearing it would be manageable for someone with his strength, but complications always arose. The sound of clicking and hissing drew their attention to the now-awake spider boss, which seemed agitated. It was a C-rank villain boss. Akira urged Izuku to take cover, attempting to devise a plan. The spider, however, dismissed Akira, expressing interest only in the true warrior. Akira paled, astonished that the creature could speak. Izuku had heard of many villains capable of speech, but witnessing it from an arachnid in person was an entirely different experience. He stated that he was being addressed, not as a question but as a fact. The creature responded with a hiss, declaring its intent to end his life for its MSTR and the MSTR beyond that. Curiosity piqued, Izuku calmly inquired about the identity of this MSTR. The spider spoke of a being beyond comprehension, one that was all-powerful and all-consuming. Before Izuku could react further, Akira fell to the ground, having met a swift end at the hands of the spider's powerful claw. The villain expressed its irritation at the fool's pestering. Izuku's eyes widened as he barely registered the creature's speed. He realized that it was incredibly fast. The spider offered him a quick and painless death, promising that its venom would numb any pain, allowing him to drift off in a calm state. Izuku scowled, fists clenched as Risaka's gauntlets glowed blue. He was not interested in dying, he was focused on the spider's demise instead. The villain invited him to come forward, eager to witness why its masters feared Izuku's growth. Taking a runner's stance, Izuku pushed off the ground with determination, noting that, like most villains, the spider's weak point was its head. He resolved to deliver a single punch to exploit that weakness. As he raced toward the villain, it did not flinch but instead sent two of its legs to strike him down. Sidestepping the first attack, Izuku reared back his right fist and punched the second leg, creating a shockwave that echoed as the spider's exoskeleton cracked. He declared that he had invested all his points into strength, confident that as long as he could match speed, he would not be defeated. To his surprise, he found himself smirking as he struck leg after leg, realizing he was not just holding his ground but actually winning. Izuku charged forward, leaping into the air and aiming his armored fist at one of the spider's leg joints. The impact bent the leg awkwardly, causing a spray of foul fluid as the creature crashed to the ground, writhing in pain. Feeling overconfident, Izuku rushed toward the villain's face, ready to deliver a decisive blow. However, at the last moment, he veered away, narrowly avoiding an acid spray that disintegrated Akira's body, leaving only his armor behind. He landed a safe distance from the corrosive pool, contemplating the danger of approaching the spider's head. Instead, he decided on a different approach, flexing his forearms as blade-like scales extended from his wrists, transforming them into makeshift swords. He resolved to bleed the creature out. Activating his sprint ability, Izuku increased his speed significantly, moving like a blur as he used the scale blades to slice off the spider's legs one by one. He managed to sever 3 before the spider anticipated his next move, flicking its leg to strike him in the abdomen and sending him crashing into a wall, which crumbled under the impact. Feeling fatigued, Izuku crossed his arms to shield himself from the relentless blows raining down from the spider, which pushed him further into the ground. As wounds began to appear on his body, he took a deep breath and prepared for one last chance, activating his status recovery. The spider's leg came crashing down where he had just been, but it realized too late that Izuku was now racing up its leg, his fist poised to strike. He refused to grant the villain the satisfaction of a final word, instead driving both gauntlets into the spider's eyes, the scales shredding through its defenses. With that, the creature collapsed, defeated, leaving Izuku panting heavily and covered in the remnants of the arachnid. He reflected on how close the battle had been and felt relieved that he had saved the status recovery reward from the daily quest. His attention was soon drawn to the glow emanating from the fallen creature, revealing 10 villain cores. He quickly gathered them up, aware that he had only about an hour before the gate would close and eject him. Though there was not enough time to mine all the mana crystals, he shrugged and grabbed a pick, ready to make the most of the time he had left. Just as he was about to begin, Izuku felt debris ricochet off him as the exit erupted in a blast behind him. An emergency quest had been issued, indicating that nearby entities intended to eliminate the player. The message warned that failure to complete the quest would result in dire consequences. 8 enemies remained to be defeated. Turning around, he spotted Natsuo and his 7 other party members entering with twisted smiles. The realization struck him that he had to confront humans. Confusion washed over him as he processed the situation. There was no way an E-rank could defeat a C-rank boss. The wealthy kid must have weakened it significantly before his demise. It was remarkable that the armor remained intact despite the corrosive damage it had endured. Natsuo's cruel smile widened as he read through the system quest, echoing Izuku's thoughts about having to confront humans. Before Izuku could react, a powerful impact sent him crashing backward into the same spot where he had previously been struck by the villain boss. In an instant, nearly half of his health was drained. Lying in the crater, dull pain reverberated through his body. He pondered how he could have forgotten that not everyone was born equal, and that the strong often exploited the weak. He recognized that he was not on equal footing with these men, these villains. Yet, the system seemed to be leveling the playing field, urging him to embrace his longing to overcome anyone in his way and become the strongest, even if it meant resorting to violence. Determined, Izuku pushed himself to his feet, crawling out of the crater with clenched fists. He felt a sense of urgency as he addressed Natsuo, questioning whether he had held back during the attack. Natsuo's eyes narrowed, confirming that he had given it his all. Izuku reflected on the nature of villains, who toyed with lives, while heroes viewed them as mere targets to be hunted. In a flash, Izuku darted forward, vanishing from Natsuo's sight. Suddenly, a splatter of something wet hit Natsuo's face, and he turned to see one of his raid members collapse, headless. Izuku stood in place, one of his gauntleted fists extended. "One down," he declared, signaling the end of their escape. Two of Natsuo's companions shrieked in terror and attempted to flee, but Izuku was faster, intercepting them and swiftly incapacitating both with his gauntlet blades. Another adversary charged at him, brandishing a broadsword. Izuku did not flinch. Instead, he struck the sword with his fist. The finely crafted steel shattered upon impact, sending shards flying and injuring its wielder. The next three foes fell even quicker than the first four, leaving only a stunned and trembling Natsuo. As fear transformed into rage, Natsuo vowed to show Izuku the consequences of crossing the Todoroki name. Natsuo unleashed flames that enveloped his body, boasting about his strength. Izuku acknowledged his power but revealed a crucial fact about himself. He drove Natsuo into the ground, shattering the rock beneath them. He stood over Natsuo's battered form, asserting his resilience against someone like him. In desperation, Natsuo pleaded for his life, offering wealth and treasures from the dungeon. Izuku dismissed the notion, having already found his reward. He approached Natsuo, who was scrambling to escape, his eyes glowing with determination. He expressed that a hero's duty was to save people from villains, and by eliminating him, he was saving lives. For Izuku, the chance to still be a hero was a significant reward for someone like him. Natsuo protested, insisting that Izuku would not escape the consequences of his actions. Izuku tilted his head, acknowledging that a massacre would indeed be reported. Though he faced a minor penalty due to his revoked license, no one would suspect an E rank had taken down 8 C and D ranks. Izuku wasted no time and swiftly ended the threat before him, using Rosaka's scales to sever the enemy's head. He ignored the sound of the skull rolling on the ground as he inspected his clothing. His outfit was a mess again, and he noted that it was a size too small, realizing it was time for new clothes. An alert from the system appeared, announcing the completion of an emergency quest. He accepted the rewards, which included a status recovery, 10 stat points, and a new skill called Bloodlust. He took a deep breath and reflected on his progress, feeling empowered by the challenges he had faced. A week later, Izuku was jogging through the park with his sister, Sakura. She expressed her disbelief that he hadn't been fined for his recent actions. Izuku explained that the strongest agencies were currently overwhelmed and had waived the fine as long as he assisted in a few other raids. Sakura found this convenient and smiled back at him. She then asked how school was going, and he assured her he wouldn't forget about the upcoming teacher-parent meeting, although he would be rushing from the UA entrance exam on the same day. Sakura sighed, accepting his response as she noticed her brother deep in thought. Izuku reminded himself that he had 4.5 weeks to prepare for the entrance exam, which included both practical and written evaluations. He was a self-sufficient 15-year-old, but UA was a unique school for aspiring heroes. He suddenly remembered that his birthday was in just 12 days and thought about treating himself with the money he earned from the C-rank dungeon. He pondered his ranking, questioning whether defeating a C-rank boss alone would elevate him to a B rank or a high C rank. He shook his head, focusing on the need to become stronger, as UA's hero classes were typically filled with the strongest ranks. With the shortage of high-ranked heroes, UA managed to attract a mix of S and A ranks, unlike many other schools that struggled to train their heroes properly. He considered his childhood friend, Kaken, and how he would likely secure a spot at UA due to his S-rank status. A notification from the system brought Izuku back to reality, reminding him of his running distance. He realized he had left Sakura behind while lost in thought. He decided to maximize his daily quest rewards by doing push-ups, noting that he wouldn't go above 200. As Sakura rounded the corner, exhausted, Izuku took off running again, this time with purpose. Sakura watched in shock and decided to head home. Doubling his daily quest provided Izuku with a hidden reward, a choice between a blessed box and a cursed box. Initially, he leaned towards the blessed box, but something intrigued him about the cursed box, recalling that in anime, demonic powers were often the strongest. This curiosity led him to choose the cursed box, which contained a key. The key allowed him to create an instance dungeon just outside the Endeavor Agency. Though tempted to explore this new dungeon, Izuku hesitated, considering the implications of leaving and re-entering it. As Izuku walked through the bustling downtown district of Jaku City, he contemplated the implications of the key being ranked at S. He realized that the dungeon would at least be A rank, and he felt unprepared. He decided it would be wise to wait until he had leveled up further before attempting to tackle it. Dressed in comfortable jeans and a dark gray jacket with the hood pulled up, he heard a familiar voice call out to him. Mr. Otachi approached, his dark hair blowing in the breeze. He expressed relief at seeing Midoriya, noting how much he had changed. He placed a fatherly hand on Izuku's shoulder, sharing his joy at their reunion. Despite the cheerful atmosphere, Izuku couldn't help but notice Kato's missing arm, which cast a shadow over the moment. Kato reassured him, emphasizing his gratitude for having survived with his life and remaining arm, as well as his skills with a blade, which he credited to Izuku. Izuku nodded, pleased to see the old man again, and inquired if Kato was also there on the Inspector Agency's orders. Kato clarified that he was there on behalf of the Agency Association, which oversaw all agencies, including the Inspector Agency. The Agency Association was led by the strongest S-rank hero in Japan, All Might. Kato noted that others had already arrived, and Izuku's attention was drawn to a familiar girl. Miss Yorozu approached, her eyes glistening with tears as she addressed him. Izuku decided it was best not to mention his role in saving her during the golem attack. She reminded him to call her by her last name, and he complied, apologizing for being late. As tears streamed down her face, another figure caught his eye. Ryuji, who had previously threatened Kato and fled with excuses, stood before him. Ryuji commented on Izuku's height, prompting a chuckle from him, who then made a light-hearted remark about sounding like his mother. Yorozu seemed more focused on Izuku's leg, expressing concern and curiosity about what had happened to it. Before he could respond, a guttural voice interrupted, mocking the atmosphere and suggesting that the heroes were involved in some sort of drama. Izuku's expression darkened as three men in orange jumpsuits emerged from a van, handcuffed. One of them, a man in a suit, glared at the group, dismissing their presence as trivial. The three men approached, leering at Yorozu. Izuku quickly positioned himself between them and her, his eyes glowing with a fierce determination that radiated an intimidating presence. He activated his bloodlust skill, instilling fear in the criminals. Despite the tension, one of the men managed to maintain his composure, taunting Izuku. Just as he considered demonstrating his newfound strength, Kato's voice broke through the tension, questioning whether they were truly being sent to a raid with villains. The woman overseeing the situation flinched at Kato's tone but explained that the men were rehabilitators, with a B-rank hero, Hitoshi Shinso, monitoring them. She reassured them that he would handle any issues that might arise. Kato, frustrated but resigned to the orders of the association, reluctantly accepted the situation. The woman quickly returned to the van, and Hitoshi Shinso approached, appearing weary with heavy bags under his eyes. He introduced himself and assured the group that he would keep a close watch on the three men, before turning to Kato to inquire who would lead the raid that day. He decided to take action, ensuring it was acceptable to Izuku. He glanced back at him, seeking approval. Izuku was surprised. To Kato, he was still an inexperienced E-rank, and he hadn't expected such respect for his opinion. He managed to respond affirmatively, trailing off as Kato bowed deeply. Kato expressed his gratitude for the second chance he had received. He acknowledged the weight of his past actions, which had resulted in the loss of 11 lives, but he also recognized that 6 had survived because of Izuku. He bowed not just for himself, but on behalf of all the other heroes, thanking Izuku Midoriya sincerely. Izuku urged Kato to lift his head. Kato complied and turned to Ryuji, asking if he had any objections to him leading the group. Ryuji sighed and turned away, indicating he had no complaints. As the group prepared to enter the portal, Izuku paused to speak with Yorozu, asking her to withdraw from the raid. Confused, she inquired why. Izuku admitted he had a bad feeling about it. She asked if he would still participate. He confirmed he would. At that moment, Yorozu's smile seemed to radiate warmth, and she declared her intention to join him. Izuku felt a sense of sluggishness, not due to any debuffs, as he was immune to such effects, but because he was intentionally holding back to avoid raising suspicion from Kato or Yorozu. He reflected on how he could have cleared the cave of goblin-type villains in mere seconds, yet here he was, waiting for them to be defeated while earning minimal experience from the few he had managed to defeat. Kato acknowledged Izuku's improvement, effortlessly dispatching another group of villains with his fiery attacks. He inquired about Izuku's impressive gauntlets, noting it was unusual to see him wielding a weapon. Izuku laughed, deflecting the question about where he had obtained his gauntlets. Though Kato was not fully satisfied with the answer, Yorozu was too captivated by Izuku's newfound skill to notice. She remarked on how she hadn't needed to create anything to heal him. Izuku brushed off her comment with a smile, attributing his abilities to some training. Yorozu noted he seemed different from the Midoriya she once knew. Izuku questioned if that was a bad thing, contemplating whether his recent actions had changed him more than he wanted to admit. Yorozu responded positively, saying it was great. ♀♀ rolled his eyes, muttering about children. Kato whispered to the monitor, expressing how wonderful it was to find love even in a dungeon. The monitor scoffed at the notion and returned to the task at hand. Kato suggested they split up since there were 3 tunnels, given it was a low-ranked dungeon. After a moment of thought, Kato agreed to the plan. Izuku offered to take a group down the right path, instructing them to regroup if they encountered the boss. Kato acknowledged the plan. Using his sensing ability, Izuku scanned the remaining tunnels, detecting the strongest signal from the left. He proposed they take that route. Kato agreed, and he and Yorozu moved ahead, giving Izuku a glimpse of ♀♀'s half-smile. Izuku felt compelled to scowl at him, but by the time he turned, ♀♀ had already looked away. With no other option, he followed closely behind Kato, questioning his decision to ignore ♀♀. Suddenly, Izuku shouted, causing everyone in the tunnel to freeze. The 3 criminals exchanged strange grins, mocking Izuku's outburst, but one of them abruptly clutched his throat as crimson poured from it. His companions fell in a similar manner shortly after. Ryuji gasped in disbelief, questioning what was happening. ♀♀, now holding a dagger, grinned menacingly. He taunted Izuku, suggesting it was foolish to call him out, noting he could see through Izuku's gaze. Izuku positioned himself protectively between Yorozu and ♀♀, recognizing the danger. He declared that while he couldn't disagree with the fate of those criminals, he couldn't allow a killer like ♀♀ to roam freely among those he cared for. ♀♀ chuckled darkly, pointing his dagger at Kato and then at Yorozu, who was hiding behind Izuku. As the only A-rank present, Yorozu believed she would be the sole witness to the unfolding confrontation when ♀♀ charged toward her with incredible speed. Overwhelmed by fear, she found herself unable to create anything for her defense, but Izuku had already made up his mind to protect her at all costs. ♀♀'s dagger clashed against Izuku's gauntlet, and the surprise in his eyes grew as he noticed the teen's other arm reaching for his throat. The tension was palpable, and just as Izuku was about to seize the government agent, ♀♀ leapt back, a sinister smile spreading across his face. He declared that he would start with Yorozu. Izuku barely managed to track ♀♀'s swift movement toward Ryuji, deflecting the blade at the last moment and countering with his own weapon. He expressed his surprise at Izuku's defense of someone he clearly had issues with. Despite his disdain for Ryuji's past cowardice, Izuku acknowledged that he was still a hero, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. In contrast, he condemned ♀♀ as being no better than the men he had killed. Instead of responding with a taunt, ♀♀ simply tilted his head and asked Yorozu for her name. Her eyes glazed over, and her trembling form became still. ♀♀ remarked on her apparent immunity, directing his attention back to Izuku. He revealed that, as an assassin type, he possessed many skills, but none compared to his quirk, brainwash. Izuku's eyes widened in alarm, urging Ryuji to restrain her. However, Shinso's calm command overpowered his shout, instructing Yorozu to eliminate everyone except for her boyfriend. In a display of her A-rank capabilities, Yorozu sprang into action, drawing 2 katanas and attempting to strike Kaito with precision. Ryuji shouted Kaito's name as he tossed his new broadsword to the swordmaster. It was a risky move, but Kaito was quick on his feet, deftly catching the sword and parrying Yorozu's attacks effortlessly. He declared that she stood no chance against them, reminding Izuku that they had the situation under control. Suddenly, a voice whispered in Izuku's ear, prompting him to turn and narrowly block Shinso's strike. He responded with determination, deflecting the dagger and landing a glancing blow on Shinso's cheek. Shinso took a step back, curiosity piqued as he inquired about Izuku's true identity. Izuku stood ready, fists raised like a boxer, introducing himself as Izuku Midoriya, E-rank. Shinso scoffed at the notion that an E-rank could rival him in speed. He speculated that Izuku had known the others for some time, concluding that he must have been reawakened recently, judging by the reactions of his friends. Ryuji, Kaito, and Hamada exchanged wide-eyed glances while continuing to fend off Yorozu without harming her. Shinso lamented the fate of Izuku's friends, suggesting they had perished at the hands of prisoners while he fought the boss. He feigned sympathy for their youth. Izuku planted his foot firmly and caught Shinso's downward swing in his palm, feeling the pressure on his armor. He demanded to know why Shinso was doing this. Shinso giggled, offering to share his reasoning. He spoke of a father seeking revenge for his daughter and his disdain for those he deemed worthless. He declared that it didn't matter what Izuku believed, they would all meet the same fate. In an instant, Shinso vanished, only to reappear beside Izuku. Izuku countered with a swift kick, aiming for Shinso's head, but the strike met only air as Shinso dodged effortlessly. Izuku engaged in a rapid exchange of blows with Shinso, sparks flying with each collision. He acknowledged Shinso's speed but insisted that it wouldn't be enough to secure victory. An emergency quest had been issued. Nearby entities intended to eliminate the player, and failure to act would result in severe consequences. If the quest was not completed, the player's heart would stop. There was one enemy left to defeat. Izuku felt the weight of the situation as he prepared for the confrontation. He knew he had to act decisively. With a swift motion, he struck Shinso in the abdomen before the latter could react. The force of the blow created a shockwave, sending Shinso crashing into the wall, a grimace crossing his face as he felt the impact. The effects of the attack were immediate. Izuku's opponent staggered, momentarily stunned and bleeding from the wound. However, Shinso quickly regained his composure, revealing his resilience. Despite Izuku's strength, Shinso smirked, confident in his skills. He vanished into a mist, his presence slipping away. Izuku's instincts kicked in, and he raised his arms just in time to block an unseen attack. Shinso's voice echoed, taunting Izuku about his sharp senses and the rarity of his camouflage skill. He challenged Izuku, hinting at a deadly strike. But Izuku, refusing to be intimidated, punched the ground with all his might. The force sent dust and debris flying, causing Shinso to lose his footing and aim wildly in the obscured area. Confusion washed over Shinso as he struggled to comprehend the darkness enveloping him. He caught a glimpse of Izuku's determined green eyes, realizing the true nature of his opponent's power. In a decisive moment, Izuku drove his gauntlet's blade through Shinso's back, ending the confrontation. As Yorozu broke free from the influence of Shinso's quirk, she stumbled into Kaito's arms, her voice barely above a whisper as she questioned the nature of her savior. Izuku looked down at Shinso with a mix of sadness and surprise, feeling a part of him break as he witnessed the life fade from the man's eyes. He spoke softly, revealing his identity as a hero who grows stronger with each battle, pondering how powerful he might become. For the first time, Shinso smiled genuinely, acknowledging Izuku's potential. He took his final breath, passing on to the next life. The emergency quest was marked complete, and Izuku was prompted to accept his rewards. He chose to accept. As he withdrew his blade from Shinso's chest, a glimmer caught his eye. He bent down to investigate and found a small rock that teleported into his inventory, labeled as a rune of stealth, which could grant him a new skill. Before he could examine it further, a trembling hand rested on his shoulder. Yorozu expressed her gratitude, and in a moment of surprise, she wrapped her arms around him. Izuku stood still, taken aback by her sudden affection, while Kato observed with a grin, remarking on how Izuku remained the same despite his newfound power. Kato shifted to a more serious tone, thanking Izuku for saving their lives. Ryuji, arms crossed and frowning, questioned their next steps. Izuku suggested they report to the association, finally breaking free from his daze. He placed a reassuring hand on Yorozu's back, agreeing with the plan. Hamada, visibly concerned, protested the idea of Izuku confronting the dungeon boss alone. Kato defended Izuku, acknowledging his strength and growth. Yorozu, her face flushed with embarrassment, insisted on accompanying Izuku. However, he firmly declined her offer, much to her frustration. Ryuji chimed in, reminding her of her previous struggles against weaker opponents. The group prepared to move forward, united in their resolve to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Yorozu lowered her head in embarrassment, acknowledging her shortcomings. She believed she was stronger than her recent performance suggested, admitting that she hadn't fully utilized her skills. Izuku chuckled softly, impressed by her cleverness in navigating the situation. He recognized her pride but reminded her of the dangers they faced, recalling the harsh fate that had befallen Akira. Kato agreed with Izuku, suggesting that it would be wise for them to leave the matter in his hands while they focused on explaining their situation to the association. The lingering effects of Yorozu's trauma went unspoken. After a moment of contemplation, Yorozu decided to take action. She pulled out an E-rank villain core from the double dungeon raid, waving it enticingly in front of Izuku. With a playful challenge, she insisted he better not be late for their dinner before confidently walking away. Izuku was left bewildered, unsure of what had just transpired. Kato, placing an arm around Izuku's shoulders, suggested that he had just secured a date. Defeating the dungeon boss felt easier than facing the spider boss or Rasaka, and Izuku found himself heading back to the gate in under 10 minutes. Kato and Yorozu had already informed the association representative waiting outside, prompting her to rush off to contact her superiors. Upon exiting the dungeon, Izuku was taken aback to see Ryuji and Hamada bowing deeply in gratitude. They expressed their thanks for saving their lives and apologized for their earlier cowardice. Ryuji, visibly remorseful, offered his sincere apologies. Izuku extended his hands to them, proposing a fresh start. The two men looked up, surprised by the warmth of Izuku's smile and the kindness in his emerald eyes. He shared a realization he had during a critical moment. Despite the necessity of combat, he refused to let hatred consume him. He chose forgiveness over animosity. Ryuji stood and accepted Izuku's hand, exhaling a sigh of relief. He playfully lamented how the young hero had brought tears to his eyes. Izuku also took Hamada's hand, introducing himself warmly. Just then, a voice interrupted, questioning Izuku's identity. It was the blonde man who had visited him in the hospital. The man introduced himself as Tsukochi from the monitoring division, explaining that he was there to address the distress caused by one of his colleagues. He intended to ask them some questions, his demeanor shifting to seriousness as he inquired about Hitoshi Shinso's fate. Kato stepped forward, admitting his involvement in Shinso's demise. Tsukochi asked about Kato's rank, to which he replied that he was a C rank. The investigator frowned, noting that Shinso was a B-rank assassin with formidable skills. He questioned how Kato had managed to defeat someone of that caliber. Kato pointed to Yorozu, explaining that her A-rank abilities had played a crucial role in the encounter. Ryuji then added that Kato had used his quirk on him, believing him to be the greatest threat. Tsukochi considered their statements, piecing together the scenario. He acknowledged that Shinso would likely underestimate the smaller girl and the man missing an arm, leaving Kato as a more viable target. Satisfied with their explanations, Tsukochi requested their assistance in completing paperwork related to the incident. Before Kato could follow, Izuku stopped him, whispering a question about why he had taken the blame. Kato explained that he believed Izuku had a valid reason for concealing the truth and that this was his way of repaying the favor. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 called out to Izuku, warning him that he might soon find himself in danger. He noted that Izuku was the only survivor of Natsuo Todoroki's raid team and, while he personally held no suspicions, he cautioned that Tuya Todoroki might not view the situation the same way. Izuku inquired about Dabi, the S-rank hero, expressing concern for his loved ones. He suggested that fleeing the country might be wise, as even the laws could not restrain someone like Dabi, a figure feared even by monsters. The detective, 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲, was approached by his assistant, a short blonde woman with round glasses, while he was driving. She questioned why he allowed the 4 individuals to escape with their deception. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲, intrigued, asked her to elaborate. She pointed out that whenever he detected a lie with his quirk, his ring finger twitched. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 chuckled, acknowledging her observation. He reflected on how even his wife had not noticed this quirk of his. He recognized that they had confirmed the lies but were puzzled about the reasons behind them. ― had held his position for 15 years without ever being completely controlled, and 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 believed he had attempted to kill them. However, he doubted their ability to kill him. Despite being rated as a high B rank, 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 felt ― should have been at least an A rank. Unless a hero possessed a quirk or skill that specifically resisted brainwashing, they would be under ―'s control, making it technically possible for him to defeat an S rank. His assistant pointed out that ― could only control one person at a time, which led to his defeat. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 clarified that ― could SWCH targets by releasing his initial victim, suggesting that the girl could have been taken over if he had sensed her strength earlier. When asked who he suspected, 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 revealed that they had tested ―'s strength at the hospital. Despite the improbability of an E rank being able to kill someone as powerful as ―, he felt a strong instinct that Izuku Midoriya was responsible. His assistant looked at him quizzically, questioning why they had not interrogated Midoriya further, noting 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲's apparent leniency towards him. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 gazed out the window, contemplating his interest in what Midoriya might do next. As night enveloped the world, Izuku and Momo left the cafe, their path illuminated by stars, the moon, and park lamps. Izuku remained quiet, still unsettled by Yorozu's intense insistence on paying for their meal. He had never seen her in such a fierce light before, feeling a chill as her eyes seemed to glow with determination when he reached for the check. Yorozu turned to him, her face masked with shame, questioning whether she should give up her aspirations of being a hero. She shared her background, explaining that she had been raised in a wealthy household where her quirk was seen as a tool for profit rather than for good. She demonstrated her ability by creating a round green matryoshka doll modeled after Izuku, expressing her frustration over her parents' expectations. Izuku felt a shudder at the thought of being viewed merely as a tool. Yorozu revealed that she could have easily escaped her situation by creating wealth but chose not to, fearing it would make her a hypocrite. She had only used her quirk once to obtain her beginner's license, unaware of the limitations it imposed on her. Despite her determination to forge her own path, she struggled with the challenges of higher-ranked dungeons, feeling incapable of making the quick decisions necessary to save herself or others. Izuku, looking deeply into her eyes, reassured her that she was mistaken. He reminded her of how she had swiftly circumvented ―'s mind control, likely saving Kato and the others in the process. He acknowledged her nervousness but emphasized that improvement comes from perseverance, not from giving up. With a bold smile, he encouraged her to believe in her potential, offering his hand in support. It was a cathartic moment for him, filled with the beauty of genuinely wanting to help someone in need, believing in their ability to grow stronger. Yorozu gasped in relief as she took his hand and looked up into his kind, warm eyes, feeling gratitude wash over her. She panted, wondering if Midoriya engaged in this routine every day. He confirmed that he did, and she asked why. Midoriya hesitated, unsure of how to explain the true nature of his reawakening. The system felt like a dangerous tool, and despite her trust, he wanted to keep its secret safe. He explained that even after his reawakening, he had felt weak. Although he had gained strength, he also became easily fatigued. He gestured to himself, noting that heroes couldn't increase their abilities post-awakening, but they could lessen the strain through training. He mentioned that while he couldn't speak from experience, those with quirks could reduce the mana drain by training as well. When he turned to check on Yorozu, he realized she had fallen behind. He quickly retraced his steps and found her collapsed on a bench, breathing heavily. Concerned, he noted her struggle to catch her breath and shook his head to clear his thoughts. He apologized for spacing out during his runs, admitting it had become second nature. Yorozu waved him on, encouraging him to continue without her. Instead of leaving, he lowered himself to the ground to start his push-ups, assuring her he would keep her company. As he maintained his rhythm, he reached for his water bottle and took a quick sip before offering it to her. She accepted it but turned the bottle to avoid drinking from the same side as him, a gesture that amused him. He shifted the conversation, asking if she truly believed enrolling in UA was the best idea. She explained that many successful agencies were founded due to UA, listing a few notable ones. When she asked if they could start an agency as successful as those, he momentarily faltered at the mention of we, realizing the implication. Yorozu blushed, clarifying that she meant both of them starting an agency. Midoriya smiled, reassuring her that he wouldn't mind running a hero agency with her. Her embarrassment turned into a shy smile, matching his happiness, though she faltered slightly when he turned to gauge her reaction. To shift the focus, he suggested they do push-ups together now that she seemed more rested. Her internal groan about the workout was overshadowed by her willingness to join him. 2 weeks later, Yorozu stammered in confusion as she watched Midoriya insert a key into midair, creating a gate. He expressed his hope that she could see it this time, noting that previously only he could see the gate. He pondered whether the system had adapted to his intentions. Overwhelmed, she asked how he could do this and where he had obtained the key. Midoriya explained that it was part of his reawakening, feeling guilty for withholding the truth from her. Her trusting nod only intensified his guilt. She then asked where their raid team was, to which he replied that they were looking at it. Her expression paled as she realized he intended for just the two of them to take on a dungeon. He reassured her that it was a C rank, insisting it was manageable. He mentioned having 2 hearthstones as backup and began to walk through the gate, only for Yorozu to grab his arm, her concern evident. Izuku paused, nodding with a serious expression. He recognized Yorozu's potential as an A rank, someone who would often find herself on the front lines of various agency assault teams. He understood that this was the kind of future she desired, a future where she could be a strong hero. Yorozu stood still, contemplating her aspirations. Being an A rank came with financial stability and a comfortable lifestyle, but it also meant facing great dangers. Each time she entered a dungeon, there was a risk she might not return. A voice echoed in her mind, urging her to abandon this path and return to the safety of her affluent life. It suggested that if she apologized to her parents, they would welcome her back without hesitation. However, Yorozu shook her head. Returning home would mean being reduced to a mere tool, someone to create items for her parents. She affirmed her determination, expressing her longing to become as strong as possible, to gain independence and live life on her own terms. Izuku smiled, and as he stepped into the gate, Yorozu took a deep breath and followed him in. Like the previous E-rank dungeon key, this one transformed the surroundings into a desolate ruin. The junior high school now resembled a crumbling prison, filled with shambling villains who turned their heads toward them. Izuku summoned his gauntlets as a swirling pink mist began to envelop the courtyard. He noticed that the mist seemed to amplify the size of the zombies around them. He instructed Yorozu to create a gas mask for herself. She quickly complied, securing the mask around her face and inquired about his safety. Izuku reassured her that he would be fine, though he had his doubts. As the pink mist touched him, a system message appeared, indicating that the zombie virus poison was detected and that his body was being cleansed. Yorozu appeared to be managing well, so Izuku gestured toward the horde of zombies, encouraging her to confront them. She hesitated, unsure if she could face them alone. Izuku reminded her of her A-rank status and reassured her that the zombies were of a much lower rank, likening the battle to squashing bugs. Noticing her anxiety, he placed a comforting hand on her back, emphasizing that he would be right there to support her. He urged her to embrace her role as a hero and to understand that she needed to become a force to be reckoned with. Despite her uncertainty, he reminded her of her previous claims about being able to take on formidable opponents. He encouraged her to recall how swiftly she had moved during those fights. Suddenly, one of the zombies lunged at him with surprising speed. Izuku instinctively raised his arm to defend himself but noticed a flash of silver and sidestepped the villain. The creature fell behind him, defeated by a clean strike. Izuku felt a surge of pride as he turned to see Yorozu, who had lunged forward, gripping a katana. Although her face was pale and her breathing shallow, she was making progress. Their eyes met, and she managed a weak smile, expressing her determination to protect him. Izuku's grin widened, grateful for her support. He encouraged her, exclaiming that they had many more to defeat. A spark of life returned to Yorozu's eyes as she nodded, drawing a second, shorter blade and joining him in battle. With each defeated foe, Yorozu found her rhythm, her movements becoming fluid as she lost herself in the fight, forgetting her initial fears. As Izuku navigated the familiar courtyard, utilizing his new camouflage skill, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had not anticipated this level of success, nor Yorozu's swift recovery. He reflected on how the unknown had likely been her greatest obstacle. It was akin to riding a roller coaster for the first time, initially terrifying, but once experienced, it became exhilarating. The act of defeating a villain was daunting at first, but with each encounter, it transformed into an empowering experience. 34. Izuku called out to the crowd of enemies. 27. Yorozu responded, quickly understanding the context of the numbers. The game was on. All Yorozu had ever desired was the strength to define herself, to break free from the identity assigned to her at 𝐒𝐻. Until this moment, she had never felt that power. Always taking a supportive role as a healer, she had been unaware of her true potential. Even when manipulated by ♀, everything had felt unclear, as if shrouded in mist. But now, everything was vivid and sharp. Could I always do this? She didn't deceive herself into thinking these were exceptionally powerful villains, but they were still foes. I suppose all that training with Midoriya paid off. 39, she shouted. Izuku delivered a powerful blow to another zombie. 51. Skill, Overwhelming Force LV1 has been acquired. 70 Mana Gauntlet only, Mastery of Gauntlets achieved. All gauntlet attacks will now have a 33% increase in power. Additionally, activating this skill will double your strength stat for a single strike. 52. Hey! Izuku glanced around, realizing that in his eagerness to examine his new skill, he had activated camouflage, allowing the remaining zombies to swarm Yorozu and meet their end at her blades. HMPH, fine. Izuku declared as he activated his new skill and emerged from camouflage. The nearest zombies were swiftly defeated as Izuku's enhanced strength stat of 150 tore through them effortlessly. His punches were so powerful that they continued forward, eliminating wave after wave of zombies. Before long, Yorozu and Izuku each dispatched their final zombie. Yorozu, radiating vitality with her eyes gleaming, dropped her swords in exhaustion and announced her count. All right, you win. I know I got 81, so you must have gotten 119. Izuku grinned, 169. What? It seems there were more than 200. Alert, zombie horde training is complete, the gate will now close. Izuku tilted his head, there's no boss. Before he could seek further clarification or survey the area, he and Yorozu found themselves once again outside Aldera Middle School, which looked unchanged. Secret quest, train a partner, completed. Would you like to accept your rewards? Accept, Izuku murmured, somewhat taken aback. Reward number 1, item, weapon. Reward number 2, stat points plus 15. Reward number 3, item, armor. Wait, this was all a quest. He looked down at Yorozu, who was smiling brighter than he had ever seen her smile. Oh no. I didn't help her overcome her fear, the system did. So you have a girlfriend, right? Sakura exclaimed as she sat on the apartment floor, devouring pizza. Izuku nearly choked on the couch, caught off guard by her remark. Where did you get that idea? Well, you've been out almost every night for training, but since the entrance exam is tomorrow, I doubt you'd risk overexerting yourself. She raised her finger as if struck by a brilliant thought. So the only thing you could be doing is spending time with your girlfriend. Izuku gulped down a glass of water, allowing the pizza to settle. Taking a deep breath, he regarded his sister with amusement. I have other responsibilities besides training. This was a fib. In the past few weeks, he had done nothing but train with Yorozu, tackle system-generated dungeons alongside her, and share meals with her. Wait, do I have a girlfriend? The notion briefly distracted Izuku from his anxiety. Ever since the zombie dungeon quest, he had been uncertain whether Yorozu's transformation into her hero persona was a miracle or a result of the system. Aside from her newfound confidence, nothing else about her had truly changed, which reassured Izuku. It had been nothing but a positive experience, but altering someone's personality without their awareness was still a concern. Fine, keep your secrets. Sakura pouted as Izuku continued to dwell in his thoughts. Glancing at the clock, she sighed, I should probably head to bed, it's late. Remember, 5 o'clock tomorrow for the parent-teacher meeting. Izuku waved off her worries, I know. I'll do my best to be on time for the entrance exams. Then that should suffice, Sakura said, heading off to prepare for bed. Then that should suffice. Izuku mused, placing a hand on his chin, she's never this relaxed about things, should I be concerned? He shook his head, it's just a parent-teacher meeting, what reason would she have to be so strict about it? I'm sure everything's fine. Level, 39 strength, 97 vitality, 59 agility, 97 intelligence, 51 sense, 81. Izuku contemplated his stats, feeling a mix of determination and anxiety as he sat beside Yorozu on the bus to UA. He hoped it would be enough. As the bus came to a stop, the announcement rang out, instructing everyone to proceed through the main entrance where staff would guide them to the lecture hall. Taking a deep breath, Izuku closed his system window and stood up, following Yorozu into the brisk April air. The scene outside was bustling with energy, with numerous buses filled with eager examinees. UA was renowned for its hero program, catering to B rank and higher, but it also offered an excellent general studies division for those not pursuing a career as pro-heroes. Gazing at the imposing school building from the courtyard, Izuku felt Yorozu's hand slip into his. He glanced over, slightly embarrassed, but smiled back at her. With enthusiasm, she encouraged him to embrace the moment. Their cheerful mood was abruptly disrupted when a rough student pushed past them, separating their hands. He muttered a threat, clearly irritated. Izuku recognized the back of the student's head instantly. Even with his gaze lowered, he knew it was Bakugo. It had been months since they last saw each other, and in that time, Bakugo had grown taller and more muscular, his face reflecting a new intensity. Bakugo felt a mix of confusion and annoyance. Although Izuku's face still bore the kindness he remembered, there was now a calmness about him that was unsettling. He scoffed, dismissing Izuku's progress, calling him useless and suggesting he and Yorozu return to the bus. In an unexpected move, Izuku stepped forward, placing a hand on Bakugo's shoulder. With a warm smile, he addressed Bakugo, reminding him of the importance of respect and cautioning him about his tone, implying that not everyone would be as forgiving. Bakugo felt a surge of instinct urging him to retreat, to resist the calm presence of Izuku. Despite the lack of malice in Izuku's eyes, an undeniable sense of fear gripped him. The disbelief that Izuku had actually become stronger mixed with the shock of hearing his name instead of the familiar nickname. This discomfort snapped him back to reality, and he stumbled back, realizing they had drawn a small crowd. Whispers circulated among the onlookers, speculating about Bakugo's past encounters and his current standing. They were surprised to see Izuku, the so-called world's weakest E-rank hero, participating in the entrance exam. Ignoring the chatter, Izuku moved past Bakugo, with Yorozu joining him at his side. Bakugo muttered a threat under his breath, his fists clenched tightly as he glared at the spectators. In the dim hall, Izuku whispered to Yorozu, suggesting that Bakugo wasn't worth the trouble. He explained that Bakugo had been like this ever since achieving S rank. Yorozu's eyes widened in surprise at the revelation. Izuku flinched at her exclamation, silently apologizing to the nearby testers who were focused on the speaker at the podium. The speaker, known as Present MIC, was a famous B rank hero with impressive sonokinetic abilities. Present MIC explained that while his quirk was rated A, his skill elevated him to S rank, complemented by notable physical strength and durability. He then announced that the cards being distributed would determine the practical exam locations, dividing the testers into 4 battlegrounds. As 𝐒𝐿 and Yorozu received their cards, they exchanged looks of mild disappointment. 𝐒𝐿 was assigned to Battleground Alpha, while Yorozu received Beta. Bakugo leaned over to glance at 𝐒𝐿's card, declaring his intent to crush him. 𝐒𝐿 met his gaze with determination, expressing his eagerness for the challenge ahead. 𝐒𝐿 noticed someone standing and pointing at him from the rows ahead, their demeanor demanding attention. The young man, wearing impeccably clean glasses and a sharply pressed school uniform, expressed his irritation about 𝐒𝐿's muttering to the students beside him. He insisted that if 𝐒𝐿 was there for leisure, he should leave, emphasizing that they were there to learn, not to chatter. Bakugo interjected, asserting that defeating villains was an exhilarating experience, questioning whether someone who didn't feel that thrill could truly call themselves a hero. Present MIC, with a laid-back tone reminiscent of a surfer, intervened, thanking the student for his comments while urging everyone to keep their composure. The student bowed in acknowledgement and returned to his seat, maintaining a stiff posture. Present MIC continued, explaining that there were indeed 4 types of villains. He noted that the first 3 were standard attack robots that anyone with decent skills could defeat. However, he introduced a more formidable type, depicted on the screen behind him, a massive figure with a tank-like lower half, a human-like torso, and a 7-eyed head. This 20-pointer was unique, existing only once per field, and while it could be defeated, some might consider it a waste of time, even for the bonus points. 𝐒𝐿 pondered whether the robots would pose a challenge for his abilities, while Yorozu assured him that she had other strategies for dealing with opponents. 𝐒𝐿 expressed his trust in her but joked about feeling upset if he ended up alone in the competition. She advised him to focus on getting in first before worrying about her. Present MIC, unconcerned with their exchange, concluded his explanation with an enthusiastic declaration of plus ultra. Suddenly, 𝐒𝐿 felt a firm grip on his shoulder. A student, clearly displeased, chastised him for continuing to mutter despite being asked to be quiet. The student questioned whether 𝐒𝐿's intention in taking the exam was to disrupt others. 𝐒𝐿 turned, his expression intense as he confronted the student, demanding to know his name. The student, Tenya Ida, relaxed slightly as he introduced himself. 𝐒𝐿 noted that Ida's magical power seemed to be around B rank. He eased the pressure of his gaze and attempted a friendly smile, pointing out that Present MIC's voice was far louder than any whispering he had done. He suggested that if Ida couldn't focus his hearing better, he might struggle against the villains. As the countdown reached its CLMX, the excitement in the air intensified. With the signal to start, 𝐒𝐿 activated his skills and dashed into the false city, leaving Ida behind in a moment of realization. Summoning his gauntlets, 𝐒𝐿 encountered his first villain, which crashed through a building on a single wheel, brandishing its weaponized arms. The villain charged at him, unable to comprehend the speed at which it was defeated. 𝐒𝐿 felt a twinge of disappointment at how easily he dispatched the foe. With no magical power to gauge, he had expected a greater challenge. As he defeated the villain, the system confirmed his victory, and he smiled at the realization that the system recognized them as enemies. With 3 more villains approaching, he saw an opportunity to level up. While examinees were typically restricted to their main weapons, 𝐒𝐿 had an advantage. Thanks to the system, any armor he equipped became invisible, allowing him to wear the Warden's necklace and Shadow Steel armor without disqualification. However, the villains proved to be mere fodder. After defeating 20, he had only gained a single level. As he leveled up, a new quest appeared, prompting a job change. Just as he considered the implications, time around him froze completely. Robots became still, Bakugo's explosions transformed into a stunning display, and even the birds halted mid-flight. The system informed him that time would remain frozen for the duration of this quest, giving him ample time to complete it. 𝐒𝐿 contemplated the significance of this time freeze, questioning whether it was a safeguard against over-reliance on such a power. He wondered why he shouldn't take advantage of this moment to eliminate the remaining robots. As it turned out, the system had other plans. Purple lightning struck the ground just in front of him, and a gate materialized, pulling him inside with an irresistible force. Perhaps it was the peculiarity of the event or the overwhelming magical energy radiating from the gate, but in that moment, Izuku sensed a shift, as if the system had finally begun to take things seriously. He questioned whether this was all the job change had to offer as he effortlessly swatted away an armored knight, finding it empty inside its shell. To someone wielding a stabbing weapon, this might have posed a challenge, but with his strength stat, they were as weak as the villains from the entrance exam. Izuku didn't even need to use his overwhelming strength skill to punch through their armor in a single blow. When 4 more approached him simultaneously, he activated his stealth mode and delivered 4 precise punches. They crumpled like paper and fell, revealing their remains and the loot they carried. Now, Izuku had Shadow Steel leg armor to complement his Shadow Steel chestplate. The Shadow Steel chestplate was classified as B-grade armor, providing a 7% reduction in physical damage but slowing movement speed if his strength was below 80. The Shadow Steel leggings, classified as A-grade armor, granted an additional 30 strength when using kicks and enhanced durability for his legs. He was surprised to discover that he had received a set bonus, though its nature remained a mystery. As the armor vanished when equipped, its icon in his inventory appeared rather ominous, with pure black plates overlapping tightly. Izuku speculated whether the secret bonus was linked to his stealth skill. Suddenly, he flinched as a scale blade emerged from his right arm, striking an invisible foe. A skeletal figure, its face obscured by cloth, appeared and collapsed beside him. He barely sensed the attack when a bright yellow light illuminated the drab stone brick hallway, rapidly approaching. He leaped back just as a fireball soared past his face, realizing that magicians were also present. With a mix of magic like Mr. Otachi's and stealth akin to Shinso's, Izuku wondered if this dungeon was replaying his previous battle. He received no response and was instead surrounded by magicians, assassins, and knights. The knights were the easiest to defeat. Lacking special abilities, they were mere fodder for Izuku's punches. However, the magicians and some archers kept their distance, firing spells and arrows while the elusive assassins and numerous knights engaged him up close. Despite the relentless assault, Izuku couldn't help but smile, feeling invigorated. He had trained his body daily, brushing against danger, and he knew that a skirmish like this would not wear him down. His overwhelming strength skill activated, and the assassins were dispatched against the walls while the knights became large, flying debris that knocked back the magicians and archers. Without hesitation, Izuku leaped onto the disoriented enemies and drove his scale blades into their necks, swiftly ending their struggles. He acquired Shadow Steel boots, a Shadow Steel ring, and a Shadow Steel necklace, all enhancing his abilities. The Shadow Steel boots provided a 7% reduction in magical damage, while the Shadow Steel ring increased his intelligence and agility. The Shadow Steel necklace offered boosts to his sense and vitality. Once again, he received a set bonus, but its details remained elusive. He shrugged it off, focusing on the strength it granted him for whatever lay beyond the door. As he placed his hand against the ornate red and gold entrance, he could almost taste the magical energy emanating from the next room, confirming it was indeed the boss room. Setting aside his apprehension, he pushed against the door, feeling Risaka's scales spark against the metal. What replaced his view of the door was an enormous throne room, with 7 rows of dark stone pillars leading up to an empty chair. Bright yellow torches illuminated the space, and the sound of metallic footsteps echoed around him. Izuku tensed as a figure clad in reflective BLD red armor emerged from an unknown source and took its position before the throne. A familiar chill raced through him, evoking a sense of nostalgia. The BLD red commander Igris stood before him, its dark red name sending a shiver down Izuku's spine. Even Risaka had only an orange name, and that had been during Izuku's weakest moments. Despite his favorable matchup against armored foes, he questioned whether he could handle this one. The knight wasted no time, charging at Izuku with surprising speed for something so heavily armored. Swinging a blade as long as Izuku was tall, Igris aimed to bisect him with a horizontal slash. Aware that even his gauntlets could not withstand such a powerful blow, Izuku ducked low, feeling the fierce wind from the strike pass over him and ruffle his tracksuit. Although the strike was formidable, it also carried tremendous momentum, leaving 𝐒𝐵RIS vulnerable for a brief moment. 𝐒𝐿 activated overwhelming strength and drove his fist into the knight's side, significantly denting his armor and sending him staggering. This distraction allowed 𝐒𝐿 to seize the sword-wielding arm and twist with all the strength he could muster. The metal creaked under the pressure, but it was too late. 𝐒𝐵RIS retaliated by slamming his free fist into 𝐒𝐿's stomach, knocking the breath from his lungs and sending him crashing into a wall, breaking through a pillar as he did so. 𝐒𝐵RIS pursued him, attempting to stab his sword toward 𝐒𝐿's head, but the teen narrowly evaded the attack by tilting his head aside, only to be struck in the stomach once more. 𝐒𝐿 seized the opportunity, wrapping his gauntlets around the blade and kicking out with all his might at 𝐒𝐵RIS's chest. The effect of the shadow steel leggings activated, forcing 𝐒𝐵RIS to leave his sword embedded in the wall and leap back. 𝐒𝐿 fell from the impact crater in the wall and regained his footing, facing 𝐒𝐵RIS once more. He anticipated that 𝐒𝐵RIS would immediately draw the two daggers holstered behind his back, but the BLD Red commander surprised him by unclipping his cape from his armor and raising his fists instead. To an outsider, this might have seemed like a slide of luck for 𝐒𝐿, given his incredible strength stat and gauntlet weapons, but the reality was more complex. Before 𝐒𝐿 could react, 𝐒𝐵RIS grasped his ankle, lifting him into the air and slamming him face-first into the brick floor. Determined, 𝐒𝐿 pushed himself up and wiped the BLD from the corner of his mouth, surprised that 𝐒𝐵RIS had allowed him to rise. He remarked on the unexpected display of chivalry. With his eyes glowing green, 𝐒𝐿 prepared to wait for 𝐒𝐵RIS's approach, cocking his fist back. 𝐒𝐵RIS tilted his head, seemingly weighing his options. 𝐒𝐿 thought he saw the knight shrug before crouching slightly. Then, in an instant, 𝐒𝐵RIS blurred forward to take 𝐒𝐿 down again. As 𝐒𝐵RIS charged, a surge of energy activated, lowering 𝐒𝐿's stats for a brief moment. 𝐒𝐵RIS slowed almost to a halt, his glowing white eyes widening as he realized his predicament. With renewed strength, 𝐒𝐿 brought his fist down, and 𝐒𝐵RIS reached for the wall behind him, a blue energy wrapping around the hilt of his sword just in time for him to raise it in defense against 𝐒�l's powerful punch. But it was not enough. A shockwave erupted as 𝐒𝐵RIS's sword shattered, and 𝐒�l's punch continued downward, splitting his helmet in two. The Red Knight collapsed, his body motionless for a moment. His clawed hand dug into the ground, struggling to push himself up, but 𝐒�l was finished with this fight. He activated overwhelming strength with his other arm and delivered a decisive punch straight through 𝐒𝐵RIS's chest, ending the battle. With the victory claimed, 𝐒�l felt the weight of exhaustion and collapsed beside 𝐒𝐵RIS, breathing heavily. He acknowledged his triumph but lamented the damage to his gauntlets. Looking down, he saw his red, blistered skin exposed, the scales around his fist shattered from the force of his strikes. Despite his disheartenment over the loss of his prized weapon, his spirits lifted as a small pile of glowing drops caught his attention. He collected the shadow steel helm, shadow steel gauntlets, leather pouch, dominator's touch, and hearthstone. The leather pouch contained an astonishing amount of gold, 1.5 million, effectively doubling 𝐒�l's current wealth. The Dominator's touch appeared to be a rune containing the same telekinetic ability 𝐒𝐵RIS had used, prompting him to break it immediately. While the hearthstone was unremarkable, the helm and gauntlets were treasures in 𝐒�l's eyes. 𝐒�l quickly equipped his new armor and admired its striking appearance. The gauntlets, like the rest of the set, appeared to be crafted from pure obsidian, featuring claw-like extensions reminiscent of 𝐒𝐵RIS's armor, giving them an intimidating look. He assessed his stats: level 47, strength 115, vitality 82, agility 130, intelligence 89, sense 109, with mana at 580 out of 1150 and HP at 3472 out of 11754. A smile spread across his face as he felt his strength surging. He thought to himself that he had become quite powerful. As he stored away the items he had removed to don his new gear, his gaze fell upon the hearthstone. He pondered whether he would need it if he were trapped in the dungeon, recalling that instance dungeons typically vanished upon defeating the boss. This realization struck him: the quest was far from over, and the challenges ahead would only intensify. Without warning, 6 portals opened around him. The job change quest was about to commence. Izuku quickly consumed several healing, mana, and stamina regeneration potions he had purchased from the system shop after defeating Igris, feeling a surge of urgency. He questioned what the last 2 hours had been if this was just the beginning. He learned that defeating enemies would earn him points, with additional points awarded based on how long he could survive. A higher score would increase his chances of receiving a high-tier job. With a scoff, he noted the words "good luck" appearing above a timer as the chaos began. Suddenly, a wave of knights emerged from the portals, armed with warhammers, swords, battle axes, and daggers. Izuku felt a rush of pre-battle excitement, bouncing on the ball of his feet with his claws poised at his sides. He calculated that his mana was full at 1150, and with stealth costing 200 initially and 1 mana per second, he could maintain that strategy for nearly 16 minutes. However, the system encouraged him to defeat as many enemies as possible, leaving him no choice but to test his new equipment. As the metal knights closed in, weapons raised, Izuku crouched low. Just before they could strike, he sprang into action. His sprint skill activated, and he blurred through their ranks, his claws slicing through armor effortlessly. He was untouchable, but not without challenges. A magician among the knights activated a detection skill, likely marking his position and enhancing the knight's awareness. After dispatching 10 foes, Izuku felt the weight of a hammer descending toward him, a calculated attack that confirmed his suspicions about the magician's abilities. Instead of dodging, he reverted to a classic move, tightening his right fist and thrusting it forward with controlled strength. The hammer shattered upon impact, scattering metal fragments harmlessly. However, his next punch was anything but harmless, as it sent the knight's armor crashing to the ground, its head completely crushed. With knights swarming around him, Izuku seized the opportunity to clear as many as possible. He widened his stance and formed 2 fists, preparing for the onslaught. His overwhelming strength skill activated, and with powerful punches to either side, he unleashed 2 massive shockwaves. The nearest knights were shredded, while those farther away were thrown back, crumpling against the walls like sheet metal. He estimated that he had taken down nearly 100, but the cost was steep, consuming 400 mana. Despite his efforts, the relentless tide of knights continued to emerge from the portals faster than he could defeat them. Frustration bubbled within him as he continued to punch, taking down one knight after another. He felt the pressure mounting, realizing he had no time to think. Skill, overwhelming strength has activated. With a powerful strike, Izuku slammed his fist into the ground, unleashing a wave of pressure that radiated outward, clearing the area around him. Although he suspected that his less focused blast hadn't taken down many knights, he welcomed the space it created for him to think. He pondered the task at hand, realizing that the instructions he received were to defeat as many as possible and endure for as long as he could. However, he understood that if he used the Hearthstone, it would mean escaping the dungeon before earning a job. This led him to conclude that there must be a way to complete the quest. Izuku noted that he wasn't gaining any experience from the knights, despite Igris providing ample opportunities. This indicated that the knights were special in some way. His gaze fell upon a magician, and he realized that despite being exposed, they hadn't launched any ranged attacks against him, only utilizing a detection skill. A sudden realization struck him as he resumed attacking the knights. They hadn't used magic against him because they were preoccupied with summoning magic. Activating sprint once again, Izuku leaped between the knights, using their shoulders and heads as stepping stones to reach the nearest magician. With the aid of his shadow steel leggings, his movements were explosive, leaving a path of destruction in his wake. Finally reaching the magician, he drove all 10 of his gauntlet claws into its chest, propelling himself forward. Using the magician's body as a cushion, Izuku crashed back to the ground as it dissolved into a cloud of black mist. In the aftermath, one of the portals and a significant number of knights collapsed, disassembled. He realized that if there was one magician for every portal, only 5 remained. Looking up, he was shocked to see that 30 minutes had already passed. This realization brought a wave of exhaustion over him, but he remained resolute. Though outnumbered, he recognized their weakness. He called out to the magicians hovering in the air behind their ranks, warning them not to get too comfortable. Chaos erupted as the knights, who had been still, surged forward, and the battle commenced. For the next 30 minutes, Izuku fought through a sea of armored foes, making his way toward the magicians. The next 2 kills were straightforward, employing the same tactics he had used previously. Initially, jumping on the knights was easy, but they quickly adapted, making it risky to land on their shoulders or heads for a 4th kill. By the time an hour and 5 minutes had passed, the magicians had developed a strategy to evade him by floating around the room. Determined, he decided to change his approach. Skill: Dominator's Touch has activated. No mana will be consumed. Imagining his hand around the magician's throat, Izuku used his new telekinetic ability to seize the target and pull him toward himself. The magician could only watch in fear as Izuku drew back his fist and struck him as he came within reach. Izuku aimed to do the same to the 2 remaining magicians, but by the time he raised his hand, they had vanished, likely hiding behind pillars or among their summoned creatures. However, a significant number of those summons disappeared as their armor was pulled apart and reformed into a massive clump, a giant metal golem. Izuku smiled, realizing it would have been much more challenging if they had retained their original forms. The golem was immensely powerful and had a wide range of attack, but it was nearly stationary compared to Izuku's rapid movements. With the area suddenly cleared, it took him only 30 seconds to locate the 3 magicians huddled over a small magic circle. Before they could react, he used Dominator's Touch to snatch one away, defeating him with a single blow, leaving only 2 targets. Surprisingly, these remaining targets appeared unconcerned. Izuku almost felt a twinge of guilt as he dragged his claws across them, effortlessly dismantling their unresisting forms. In an instant, the entire room of armor collapsed, leaving a breathless Izuku Midoriya as the sole survivor. He fell to his knees, his gauntlets heavy against the ground, wondering if it was finally over. Thankfully, the system seemed to acknowledge his thoughts. All the villains in the room had been defeated, signaling the end of the quest. A job would be granted after assessing the player's actions. Izuku pondered the outcome, wondering if he would be assigned the warrior or tank class based on his weapon choice and strength. Moments later, the revelation of his fate appeared before him. Wherever he went, the Reaper followed. His path was marked by remnants of battles and an unsettling atmosphere. Izuku raised his eyebrows, questioning the darkness surrounding his potential role. As he possessed great strength, he relied solely on himself, leaving nothing for his teammates. His longing for power was strong enough to summon those wandering the Valley of Death, commanding an army that would pave the way for him, ensuring he would never need assistance again. Confusion washed over him as he realized his job was not what he expected. He was designated as a necromancer. Izuku was taken aback, expressing disbelief at the assignment, especially since he had hardly focused on his intelligence. He contemplated whether to accept or refuse this role. The allure of creating an army was tempting, but he feared they would be ineffective if they couldn't level up like he could. Ultimately, he decided against it. The system informed him that Necromancer was a hidden class, prompting him to reconsider. Realizing the uniqueness of the situation, he accepted the job, acknowledging the system's guidance. His job was confirmed, and based on his performance, he would have the opportunity to promote to a superior class. Points were awarded for various achievements, including maintaining high health and defeating all enemies. Suddenly, a wave of darkness enveloped him, signaling his promotion from Necromancer to Shadow Monarch. He learned a job-exclusive skill and received bonus stats, along with the title The One Who Overcame Adversity. Izuku felt invigorated, as if adrenaline surged through him. The bonuses revealed themselves, indicating that the system had intended for him to become a Shadow Monarch all along. His armor materialized, transforming into a complete suit that enveloped him in a sleek, black design. He admired his appearance, feeling a sense of power and intimidation. He wondered if he could deactivate the active skill, and upon focusing, the armor became invisible, allowing him relief since he would need to conceal it during the entrance exam. As he surveyed the room, he noticed messages indicating that shadow extraction was available on a target. Realizing this was a means to raise the fallen, he contemplated a command phrase. A smirk appeared as he relished the power he held and declared, "Arise." The remains of the fallen began to stir, dark, inky forms emerging as they took shape. Within moments, over 30 night-shaped shadow creatures stood before him, their eyes glowing a striking blue. Shadow extraction was now a skill he possessed, allowing him to create shadow soldiers from lifeless bodies without requiring mana. The chance of failure increased with the target stats and the time elapsed since their demise. Shadows able to be extracted, 39 skill. Save Shadow LV 1 job-specific skill. No mana required. Izuku could absorb created shadow soldiers and save them. Saved soldiers could be summoned and reabsorbed whenever and wherever the animator desired. Saved shadows, 0-26 Shadow Infantry LV 1 rank, Normal Shadow Magician LV 1 rank. Elite Izuku noted the numbers, realizing he could create 39 shadows but only store 26 of them. Although slightly disappointed by that limit, a new thought brightened his mood. He turned to the lifeless red armor of 𝐒𝐻𝐽. If he could claim 𝐒𝐻𝐽, he would effectively have 2 A-rank shadows in his party. He understood that shadow extraction could be used on this target once one or more shadow soldiers had been sent to the world of nothingness through extraction cancel. He decided he needed to remove the weakest 14 to make room for 𝐒𝐻𝐽 and save the rest. With a firm fist, he tapped the nearest infantry and commanded the cancellation of 14 infantry units. As the shadows dissolved into the ground without a trace, a warning message appeared. You cannot recall shadow soldiers that have been sent to nothingness. Izuku nodded, acknowledging the expected outcome. Without delay, he approached the red armor and commanded it to arise. For a brief moment, shadows seemed to struggle within the armor, attempting to escape, but they quickly dissipated, leaving Izuku momentarily off balance. You failed to extract the shadow. Attempts remaining. 2 Izuku frowned, recognizing that this would not be as simple as he had hoped. 𝐒𝐻𝐽 was much stronger than the others and had been dead for quite some time. Nevertheless, he was determined not to give up. He commanded once more for 𝐒𝐻𝐽 to arise. You failed to extract the shadow. Attempts remaining. 1 With a heavy sigh, Izuku glanced around, his gaze landing on the empty throne once again. This time, instead of commanding the lifeless body, he extended his hand and urged 𝐒𝐻𝐽 to stop protecting the seat of someone long forgotten and instead serve him. Bakugo felt a surge of satisfaction at encountering the waste of space again, though he would never admit it. His disgust and anger had intensified during the exam, pushing him to exert more effort with his abilities than ever before. He was determined to become stronger than anyone else, even surpassing All Might, proving that he was not someone who needed rescuing. Fueled by that anger, he prepared to unleash his power on the weak robot before him. However, he was taken aback as a dark shadow creature darted past, cleaving the robot in two with a swift motion. Bakugo shouted in disbelief, landing on the robot's remains and scanning the battlefield, shocked to see over 24 of these creatures moving with agility, claiming kills effortlessly. Using his explosions, Bakugo propelled himself into the air, surveying the area, confused by the presence of 6 shadow magicians and 𝐒𝐻𝐽 standing nearby. He dismissed them as mere extras protecting 𝐒𝐻𝐽, thinking someone must feel pity for his helplessness. Little did he know how wrong he was. Meanwhile, Izuku observed the effectiveness of his army from a distance, watching as his magicians cast blaze magic at any approaching threats. Upon exiting the dungeon, he found himself right where he had entered, the portal's time resuming moments later. He turned to 𝐒𝐻𝐽 and asked if he was bored watching his fellow knights fight. 𝐒𝐻𝐽 was visually striking among the shadow minions, his cape flowing like a waterfall of darkness, and his cool blue eyes had an unsettling effect on Izuku. Yet, 𝐒𝐻𝐽 merely placed a hand over his chest. Though he could not speak, Izuku understood his silent message. He had given orders to everyone but 𝐒𝐻𝐽, allowing him the freedom to choose his actions. It seemed 𝐒𝐻𝐽 had decided to stay by Izuku's side, though that would not last long. Suddenly, a massive 20-pointer emerged from the ground, causing a nearby street and buildings to erupt into dust. As debris flew in every direction, a large piece of concrete hurtled toward Izuku. He remained still, confident in his choice. Without needing to be asked, 𝐒𝐻𝐽 positioned himself in front of Izuku, his previously shattered longsword now transformed into a shadow blade that effortlessly sliced the debris into 4 pieces, which fell harmlessly to the sides. Izuku was impressed, barely feeling the wind from the explosion. 𝐒𝐻𝐽, now kneeling before Izuku, looked up at him, awaiting instructions. 𝐒𝐿 expressed his longing for 𝐸𝐵RIS to rescue anyone endangered by the 20-point villain. He was eager to test 𝐸𝐵RIS's true strength, but his own anticipation to showcase his abilities was palpable. 𝐸𝐵RIS lowered his head briefly in acknowledgement before standing and sprinting toward the voice of a panicked girl, trapped beneath rubble and moments away from being crushed by the robot's fist. 𝐒𝐿 followed closely behind the knight, his right fist charged with energy, preparing for the strongest attack he had ever conjured. As 𝐸𝐵RIS crouched to lift the heavy debris off the bob-cut brunette, 𝐒𝐿 drew back his arm, taking a deep breath just as the villain's attack approached. The activation of his skills resonated within him, enhancing his power. With a hiss of air escaping his demonic gauntlet, 𝐒𝐿 propelled his fist forward, colliding with the villain's head-on. For a brief moment, the world seemed to fall silent. Then, it erupted into chaos. Fortunately, 𝐸𝐵RIS had freed the girl and moved her to safety, preventing her from being harmed by the force of 𝐒𝐿's punch. The impact was so tremendous that the villain's arm was severed, flying back and causing a significant reaction. Thankfully, the robot was mounted on tank treads, preventing it from collapsing entirely over the city. 𝐒𝐿 felt a surge of accomplishment as he realized he had leveled up multiple times. Breathing heavily, he gazed in awe at his gauntlets, feeling a sense of pride. When he turned around, 𝐸𝐵RIS stood before him once more, cradling the girl in his arms and presenting her to him. 𝐒𝐿 had intended for 𝐸𝐵RIS to save her, but he let the thought go as he took the girl's hand and helped her to the ground just as the PA system activated. The announcement declared the end of the exam, instructing anyone in need of medical assistance to seek out Recovery Girl, who was making her way onto the battlegrounds. Those not requiring help were free to return to the buses, with results to be mailed within the week. 𝐒𝐿 felt a laugh bubbling up at Present MIC's enthusiastic announcement, a refreshing change from his middle school experiences. However, he quickly turned his attention back to the girl, asking if she was hurt. The girl, still in shock, blushed lightly, seemingly flustered by 𝐸𝐵RIS's heroic actions. 𝐒𝐿 noted her reaction, thinking it was a good sign for 𝐸𝐵RIS. The girl finally snapped back to reality and shook her head, admitting to only a few bruises. Just as 𝐒� was about to respond, he heard a familiar voice call out his name, filled with urgency. Sensing danger, 𝐸𝐵RIS immediately positioned himself between 𝐒𝐿, the girl, and the incoming threat. The speed of the attack was astonishing, and 𝐒� only caught a glimpse of the explosion that disarmed 𝐸𝐵RIS. Using his mana, 𝐒� quickly restored 𝐸𝐵RIS's arms, but his anger at the attacker surged. It could only be Katsuki Bakugo, daring as ever. 𝐒� called to 𝐸𝐵RIS, urging him to show his capabilities. 𝐸𝐵RIS nodded as the remaining 19 infantry and 6 magicians gathered around him, ready to protect 𝐒� at all costs. With his sword leveled at Bakugo, 𝐸𝐵RIS prepared to charge forward, willing to fight if necessary. Bakugo wasted no time in ignoring the knight, launching himself directly at 𝐒�. 𝐸𝐵RIS moved to intercept, but before anyone could reach their target, a bright figure descended from the sky, crashing between the 3 fighters and momentarily staggering them. A boisterous voice proclaimed that fighting among examinees was prohibited, emphasizing the importance of school rules. It was All Might. 𝐒�, though unfazed by the external commotion, felt a rush of excitement inside. He realized he would have to wait to see 𝐸𝐵RIS in action another time, expressing his regret as he used Save Shadow to disperse the surrounding shadow soldiers, leaving just him, the girl, Bakugo, and All Might. All Might called out to 𝐒�, insisting they needed to resolve the situation and avoid any animosity between the top scorers. However, 𝐒� waved him off with a heavy heart, wishing he could stay and converse with one of his favorite heroes. He explained that he had a parent-teacher conference to attend for his sister, leaving the encounter for another day. All Might appeared to hesitate for a moment, expressing his apologies and acknowledging 𝐒�'s responsibility. He hoped they could have a conversation at a later time. 𝐒� felt a genuine smile return to his face, affirming that he would be available. He had anticipated that the UA entrance exam would involve an assembly, but fortunately, he was able to leave the school grounds. With the extra time, he boarded the bus without any issues and headed home, focusing on changing into more comfortable clothing. Last week, 𝐒�'s income had increased, allowing him to purchase new clothes for this meeting without any trouble. He was so engrossed in preparing that he overlooked the simple note resting on the coffee table. Only a few months had passed since Izuku graduated from 𝐿𝐷era Junior High, the school where Sakura was attending summer classes and where she would continue her studies. As he walked down the junior high halls with newfound confidence and energy, he no longer looked down in shame or avoided eye contact. Instead, he stood tall, drawing a few admiring glances from the female students. He returned some friendly smiles, surprised that even though he had just graduated, people were whispering about him as if he had always been a part of their school. It took only a few more minutes to locate the teacher's spacious office and take a seat across from the neatly dressed woman, a teacher he had never encountered during his time there. She smiled after pouring Izuku some tea, remarking on how she had no idea Sakura had such a cool brother. Izuku appreciated her kind words. The teacher set her cup down and praised Sakura, noting her straight A's, focus, and great personality. Izuku smiled with pride, pleased to hear such compliments. He acknowledged that he was aware of Sakura's ambition to enter the medical field, and the teacher confirmed that she had the intelligence and quirk for it, as long as there wasn't too much pressure on her. Izuku agreed, stating that Sakura was more than motivated and that he had never needed to pressure her into doing homework or studying. The teacher sighed in relief, expressing her concern about how many brilliant students become burnt out by their parents before reaching high school. However, she had one serious concern regarding Sakura. Her friendly demeanor shifted as she mentioned overhearing a conversation between Sakura and her friends about taking on a dungeon with a raid party. Initially dismissing it due to Sakura's age and the unlikelihood of her obtaining a beginner's license, the teacher acknowledged how sneaky kids could be. Izuku stood up before the teacher finished her sentence, urgently asking if Sakura was still at school. The teacher hesitated, revealing that Sakura had left about an hour ago after finishing her studies early. Suddenly, Igris rose from the ground, and Izuku commanded him to search the surrounding gates for Sakura immediately. Igris nodded and disappeared into the ground to follow his 𝐵𝐵stia's orders. Izuku apologized to the teacher, explaining that he needed to head home right away to check on Sakura. The teacher's eyes widened in realization, and she panicked, standing up alongside him, urging him to hurry, expressing her fear of what might happen if a student got hurt because of her. Izuku reassured her that she couldn't have known Sakura would follow through with it and thanked her for bringing the matter to his attention. Though he had ridden his motorcycle to the school, it felt slow compared to his maximum running speed. Reluctantly, he left the bike behind and activated sprint, blurring through the campus and onto the streets, weaving between cars and even jumping over them when necessary. In just a few minutes, he reached his apartment, sweat dripping from his forehead and his breathing labored, reminiscent of his time in the job change dungeon. He called out for Sakura as he rushed through the rooms, finding nothing. Just as he was about to run back out the door to join his shadows on the streets, his eye caught the slightly crumpled paper left on the coffee table. As he picked up the note, a sense of dread washed over him. He read that his sister had decided to take on gate work, despite knowing he wouldn't approve. She mentioned that she didn't want him to worry and felt it was necessary since he had been spending less time at home. She reassured him that it was only a C-rank dungeon and that her B-rank healing would keep her safe. She urged him not to look for her, insisting she could handle it alone. With a surge of urgency, Izuku crumpled the note and rushed out the door, searching for the nearest C-rank dungeons in his area. He found 3 options and quickly dialed Yorozu's number. After a few rings, she answered, her voice filled with surprise at his tone. He interrupted her, asking where she was. She informed him that she was downtown at the cafe they had visited after their last raid. Izuku explained that his sister had entered a C-rank gate and urgently requested that she check the location he sent her. He asked her to stop her, even if it meant using force. Without hesitation, she agreed to leave immediately. Grateful, Izuku expressed his thanks and dashed through the open doors of his apartment complex. As he ran, he heard her voice in his mind, reminding him that they were even now. Fortunately, the first gate he reached was still unentered, with the raid party checking their gear. He leaped from rooftop to rooftop, landing with a thud that startled the heroes below. He called out, asking if anyone in their party was named Sakura, a B-rank healer. A few members shook their heads, confirming she wasn't there. Apologizing, he jumped back into the air, heading for the next location. Upon landing on another rooftop, one of his basic infantry appeared beside him, shaking his head when Izuku asked if he had found her. The knight held up a map, showing several locations marked off. Realizing it was a progress report, Izuku bowed his head in apology for his earlier outburst. The knight waved his hands in a gesture of reassurance, insisting that Izuku had nothing to apologize for. Izuku took the map and quickly scanned it, noting a specific location marked with an X. He acknowledged that he would have checked there next and appreciated the knight's help. The knight seemed to blush before kneeling and disappearing into the ground. Yorozu texted him, stating that Sakura wasn't at any of the locations she had checked. Frustrated, Izuku growled that she still wouldn't answer her phone. He feared that it meant one of two things: either she was already inside the gate, where electronics didn't work, or she was ignoring him. He hoped it was the latter. Yorozu informed him that she had others checking the other gates and would meet him at the one they were both heading toward. Izuku sent her another location before sprinting off. They were both a similar distance away, but she was slightly closer, leaving him uncertain of who would arrive first. Some might have deemed Izuku's actions hypocritical, being so protective of his sister despite being a greater risk-taker himself. However, that was his role as an older brother, to be overly protective, even if it made him a hypocrite or caused her to resent him. With their mother on life support, his primary goal was to ensure Sakura lived a long, healthy life, free from the dangers of the gates. Within 5 minutes, he spotted the familiar blue glow of the gate from the rooftops. Its pulsing light indicated that people were beginning to enter. It took him a few more seconds to reach the edge of the rooftop, but it felt like an eternity as he looked down at the scene below. Yorozu was rushing toward the gate, having arrived just moments before him, calling out that Sakura had just gone inside. Surprised by her ability to sense him, he didn't waste any time and leaped off the roof, diving headfirst through the vortex, with Yorozu following closely behind. Izuku found himself tumbling into a hill of snow as he passed through the gate. Quickly regaining his footing, he scanned the bewildered faces of the other heroes around him. His gaze finally landed on his target, a small girl with dark black hair. Izuku rushed to Sakura, gripping her shoulders and turning her to face him. Her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment as he exclaimed in frustration about her reckless decision to enter a gate. Yorozu, sensing the tension, called out to him, her voice tinged with concern. She needed to get through to him, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. Izuku continued, expressing his worry about the dangers they could face, reminding her of her aspirations to become a doctor and the importance of staying safe. Finally, Yorozu raised her voice to capture his full attention, revealing that they were in a red gate. Izuku's eyes widened in realization. He had been so focused on his sister that he hadn't noticed the surge of magical energy around them. Sakura, feeling the panic rise, whispered in confusion, trying to process the gravity of their predicament. Izuku cursed under his breath and, with a swift motion, turned both of them to shield Sakura from an incoming ice arrow, which instead struck him in the back. He grunted in pain but quickly called for Igris, his shadow, who appeared instantly and began to deflect more incoming ice arrows. He commanded the infantry to protect the others while instructing the magicians to provide visual support. As the basic knights sprang into action, the magicians activated their skills, revealing several figures lurking in the trees. The armored man, shaking off his initial shock, took charge, urging everyone to prepare for the ice-type villains they faced. He called for heat magic and quirks to create fire barriers. Despite the chaos, the remaining heroes focused on the task at hand, launching spells and attacks at the hidden enemies. Seeing his allies transform from passive observers to active fighters, Izuku adjusted his orders, prioritizing Sakura's safety above all else. He instructed Igris to protect her at all costs, even if it meant putting himself in danger. Stepping away from Sakura, he grimaced as he pulled the ice arrow from his abdomen. Yorozu quickly rushed to his side, applying her special potion and wrapping the wound with bandages. Izuku marveled at how effective her potions were, even more so than the system's offerings. The armored man shouted at Izuku, urging him to recall his summons to avoid overextending their forces. Taking a moment to reassess the situation, Izuku realized his earlier commands might have been too aggressive. The arrows had come from a small welcoming party, not an overwhelming army. Igris knelt, ready to obey, although Izuku sensed his reluctance to accept such orders. Sakura looked around, her eyes wide with confusion, struggling to grasp the reality of their situation. The leader of the group crouched over two fallen young men, their faces encased in ice, and declared the grim news. He explained that they were not in a typical dungeon but a red gate, where their only options for escape were to defeat the boss, wait for the gate to open, or face total defeat. Panic erupted among the group as someone questioned the leader's certainty about their circumstances. Ignoring the commotion, the leader removed his helmet, revealing a young man with a small scar on his upper lip. He introduced himself as Shinji Nakami, an A-rank hero, sharing that he had been trained for this moment. He emphasized the need for teamwork to survive and asked for introductions from the newcomers. Izuku bowed slightly, the pain from the arrow subsiding. He introduced himself as Izuku Midoriya, explaining that he had come to retrieve his sister but now needed to protect her. Yorozu followed suit, stating that she had been assisting him in finding the gate. Shinji assessed their abilities and expressed relief at having them on his side, recognizing their potential in the challenges ahead. Yorozu began by narrowing her gaze at Izuku, questioning his newfound ability to summon. Izuku smiled awkwardly, indicating that he would share the details later, once they were out of the perilous dungeon. Shinji interjected, suggesting that they form a hunting team to pursue and defeat the boss. Izuku hesitated, unsure if it was a wise decision. Shinji appeared taken aback by the doubt cast on his leadership, but Yorozu clarified that while the dungeon was ranked C, the Red Gate could hold unknown dangers. Izuku pondered the situation, recognizing that red gates could take months to open naturally. Yorozu pointed out that time flowed differently inside the dungeon, allowing them a week at most. Izuku questioned whether anyone would truly want to endure 7 months in such conditions. Shinji, although pale, asserted his determination to face the boss alone if necessary, rallying those willing to join him. The group of heroes exchanged glances, weighing the choice between following the experienced A-rank hero or the unknown teenager. Ultimately, 15 opted to accompany Shinji, while 5, including Izuku, Yorozu, and Sakura, decided to stick together. Shinji cast one last look at Izuku, surprised by his decision not to join the fight, even with his summons. Izuku explained that he wanted to minimize risk for his sister, choosing instead to wait for the gate to open. Shinji wished him luck, and Izuku reciprocated the sentiment. As Izuku ventured into the forest with the lower-ranked heroes, he remained unaware of the S-rank presence lurking just outside the Red Gate, waiting patiently. As they moved deeper into the woods, the trees grew denser, blocking out more light. One of the B-ranks nervously pointed out that they were entering Ice Bear territory. Izuku and Yorozu exchanged knowing looks, both realizing that ice elves posed a greater threat than the bears. They shared a brief moment of laughter, easing the tension, before Izuku reassured the group that their primary concern was the ice bears. Yorozu's smile was warm, though it did little to ease the chill felt by Sakura and the others. Izuku then retrieved warm fur coats from the system store, surprising everyone with his spatial magic. Yorozu approached him, her expression a mix of betrayal and curiosity, questioning the sudden emergence of his skills. Izuku promised to explain everything once they were safe, silencing her inquiries as he turned to the rest of the group, advising them not to ask questions. As they resumed their journey, now warmly dressed, Izuku summoned Igris to accompany them. While some members of the raid were still wary of the night, Sakura understood that Izuku had control over his summons. Izuku instructed that as long as they were in the dungeon, Igris would stay close to him, Yorozu would protect the others, and he would take charge of the 5 with him. Sakura, having recovered from the earlier shock, asserted her capabilities as a B-rank, though Izuku reminded her that her healing skills were not enough for combat. Just as they were about to discuss their next steps, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, signaling that they were not alone. Izuku felt a surge of power as the onyx black armor enveloped him, enhancing his strength and intelligence while slightly reducing his agility. He rolled his shoulders, allowing the warm armor to settle comfortably around him, just as 5 massive ice bears emerged from the forest, charging toward him with thunderous steps. The trees creaked and splintered under the weight of the approaching creatures. Sakura marveled at the exquisite craftsmanship of the shadow steel armor, her eyes wide with admiration. Despite the imposing appearance of the armor, the ice bears showed no signs of hesitation. 𝐒𝐿 calmly extended his hand toward the nearest bear, which, lacking in intelligence, charged directly into his palm. The impact was sudden and decisive, as the bear's momentum led to its own downfall. A notification echoed in his mind, signaling a level up. 𝐒𝐿 shook off the remnants of the encounter and turned his focus to the remaining bears, who were now visibly unsettled by what had just transpired. In a mood for some action after a long day, he dashed toward the closest ice bear, lifting it effortlessly and slamming it down with force. Another level-up notification chimed in his mind. Using the trees as launching pads, 𝐒𝐿 leaped between the remaining bears, executing precise strikes as he moved. In what felt like mere moments to 𝐒𝐿, the battle concluded swiftly, lasting only 30 seconds in reality. His stats updated, revealing his current level and enhanced abilities. With a sense of exhilaration, 𝐒𝐿 noted the significant boost from his armor, despite the agility reduction. He landed heavily in front of his companions, the armor dissipating with a clanking sound. With a bright smile, he declared that it was the perfect spot to set up camp, having secured a food source from the fallen bears. He turned to Sakura, adopting a tone that conveyed disappointment rather than anger, prompting her to look embarrassed while Yorozu watched with amusement. Sakura explained her concern about 𝐒𝐿's late nights and her longing to help, mentioning her B-rank healing abilities and her hopes of earning extra money. 𝐒𝐿 sighed and placed a reassuring hand on her head, his voice gentle as he revealed that he had reawakened and had been clearing dungeons with Yorozu, who stood nearby, her face flushed with embarrassment. Sakura gasped in surprise, exclaiming that Yorozu must be his girlfriend. 𝐒𝐿 was momentarily taken aback, his thoughts freezing like the winter landscape around them. Yorozu, feeling shy, hid her face in her parka, overwhelmed by the unexpected declaration. Recovering from his surprise, 𝐒𝐿 playfully tugged at Sakura's cheek, asserting his role in the conversation. Sakura apologized, promising to stop if he did. 𝐒𝐿 groaned, releasing his grip and standing up. He turned to Yorozu, who was regaining her composure, and informed her of his plan to go hunting, asking her to keep an eye on Sakura. She nodded, a smile breaking through her blush, leading 𝐒𝐿 to ponder that if he were to have a girlfriend, he couldn't imagine anyone better than Yorozu. Yorozu, however, reminded him that they already had plenty of ice bear meat. 𝐒𝐿 playfully admonished her for asking unnecessary questions, and she muttered something under her breath before falling silent. With that, he confidently strode into the forest, hands tucked into his pockets, ready for his next adventure. 𝐒𝐿 contemplated the possibility of disabling the daily quest requirements while hanging upside down from a thick branch, his knees gripping the wood. It was inconvenient to have to train inside a red gate, even if the daily rewards were appealing. With a swift motion, he released his legs and dropped to the ground, flipping at the last moment to land gracefully on his feet. Now warmed up, he decided it was time to recruit some ice bears to his ranks. He heightened his sense stat, searching for the nearest concentration of magical energy and discovering a deep, dark cave. Approaching without hesitation, 𝐒𝐿 assessed the packs of ice bears, their eyes glowing red and fur bristling at the sight of him. He commanded his shadow army, a mass of shadows erupting from his back and enveloping the forest in darkness. Within moments, the shadows took form, creating his formidable shadow army. With 𝐒𝐿 by his side as general, 𝐒𝐿 gestured toward the horde of bears, issuing the command to attack. His forces surged forward with silent determination, contrasting sharply with the ice bear's thunderous roars. The clash of flesh and shadow metal was unlike anything 𝐒𝐿 had witnessed before. Though there were only about 55 combatants, the intensity of the battle was nearly overwhelming. From the outset, it was evident who held the advantage. The ice bears, with their massive frames and powerful strikes, were large targets. When they fell, they stayed down, while the shadow warriors refused to yield. 𝐒𝐿 marveled at the rapid regeneration of his troops, grateful for his role as Shadow Monarch. If they didn't consume so much mana, they might as well have been invincible. He quickly consumed a mana potion and activated his armor skill, boosting his intelligent stat. Magicians unleashed fireballs, scorching the bears with an intensity they had never experienced. Soldiers targeted their tendons, bringing them down for decisive strikes. Meanwhile, 𝐒𝐵RIS remained vigilant, his gaze fixed on the enormous figure emerging from the cave. Izuku wondered if 𝐒𝐵RIS was providing his own commands, considering he was his second-in-command. He pondered how much independence 𝐒𝐵RIS truly had. Suddenly, Izuku felt a significant drain on his mana and recognized the source. An ice bear, at least 4 times larger than the others, had struck down a line of shadows, taking out 7 with one blow. He faced the ice bear leader, noting the scars crisscrossing its left eye and the 2 additional scars stretching down its torso, forming an X. Despite these markings, the bear showed no signs of weakness as it effortlessly swiped away the lower Shadow Knights, depleting Izuku's mana completely. With no mana left, he realized his shadow soldiers could no longer regenerate. Strategically pulling back the infantry and using the magicians to cover their retreat, Izuku called upon his strongest ally, urging 𝐒𝐵RIS to demonstrate his abilities. 𝐒𝐵RIS complied, drawing his sword with grace and holding the massive blade with ease. In a blur, he charged forward, striking with all his strength. The ice bear roared in response as 𝐒𝐵RIS ascended its front leg, creating a spiral of crimson that splattered onto the ground, hissing against the cold snow. To Izuku's surprise, 𝐒𝐵RIS did not remain on the bear's back but leaped past it, landing on a nearby tree. Izuku smiled, pleased to see his influence on 𝐒𝐵RIS. The Shadow Knight mimicked Izuku's earlier attack, launching off the tree and driving his sword into the bear's other leg. His momentum from the tree propelled his blade through muscle and tendon. When 𝐒𝐵RIS landed, rolling to a stop in front of the bear without fear, he had inflicted 2 massive wounds on its arms, effectively incapacitating it. However, the enraged creature was undeterred. Using its powerful back legs, it lunged at 𝐒𝐵RIS, attempting to overpower him. It never noticed 𝐒𝐵RIS's blade moving. Izuku watched in awe, questioning whether 𝐒𝐵RIS had been holding back during their previous encounter. The ice bear's head spun through the air, just moments from hitting the ground when 𝐒𝐵RIS swiftly caught it by its fur. Without his armor, Izuku questioned whether 𝐒𝐵RIS was truly stronger than him. Even with the armor, could they be equals? He observed as 𝐒𝐵RIS knelt before him, presenting the head of their foe as a trophy. Izuku praised him for his excellent performance while the remaining ice bears fell to defeat. As he strolled over to the lead bear, he commanded it to rise. The corpses of 25 bears trembled with dark energy as their mana was absorbed, transforming into a duplicate shadow soldier. Izuku noted the ranks of the shadows he had summoned. 24 were normal grade, and 1 was elite. He recalled the message he received when he revived 𝐒𝐵RIS, realizing that neither the magicians nor the ice bear had given him the option to name them. This indicated that the current ranks were normal, elite, and knight. Lost in thought, Izuku was surprised when the lead bear approached him, affectionately nudging him. Caught off guard, he laughed warmly and reached out to pet the shadow, marveling at how its thick fur felt just like a real bear. 𝐒𝐵RIS stood nearby, arms crossed and eyes narrowed, clearly envious of the attention the bear shadow was receiving. A few knights approached him, offering comforting pats on the shoulder. Over the week, Izuku had significantly reduced the ice bear population, leveling up multiple times and acquiring another 10 shadows. Recognizing the importance of his intelligence stat, he dedicated all his daily points to it. Their diverse raiding team had established a base camp, complete with food storage, a fire pit, seating, and sleeping areas. The bears had provided a plentiful food source, while the trees offered raw materials. They were not merely surviving, they were thriving. With most ice bears eliminated, the threat they posed had diminished, making the camp feel almost like a vacation. This sense of peace was disrupted when an A-rank member rushed back to them. Izuku was high in a tree, engaged in his workout, when he sensed a surge of magical energy. It was just within his range, indicating that something had arrived at the base camp. He quickly descended and sprinted toward the source of the commotion, hearing distant shots. Orozu skillfully parried Shinji's blade, countering with a slash to his forearm that left a thin red mark on his damaged armor. He accused her of hiding their food supply, swinging wildly in frustration, blaming her for their predicament. Orozu calmly evaded his erratic attacks, asserting that they had offered him a chance and that the fault lay solely with him. In her left hand, she conjured a handgun, loaded and aimed at Shinji. Ordinary weapons like swords or guns were nearly ineffective against higher-ranked heroes or villains unless infused with magical energy, something Yorozu had yet to achieve with firearms. However, while her gun lacked lethality, it produced loud noises that triggered instinctual reactions. Shinji instinctively flinched, raising his hands to shield his face as Yorozu fired several rounds, which harmlessly bounced off him. Yet, what did not ricochet was her katana. Unlike the gun, her sword had been fully enhanced with mana. It easily found a gap in his armor, breaking through the skin and exiting from his back. Shinji gasped, dropping his damaged sword as he collapsed, blood spilling from his mouth. But Yorozu was not finished. After withdrawing her blade, she pushed him to the ground, binding his legs and hands with reinforced carbon steel wires. Ensuring he couldn't escape, she retrieved 2 bottles of healing potion, pouring their contents over him. The wound healed almost instantly, closing without issue just as Izuku arrived, sprinting toward Yorozu, who was crouched on the snowy ground. Everyone was safe, she announced, but Izuku didn't slow down, causing her eyes to widen in surprise. His gauntlet was extended to the side, as if he intended to strike her. Suddenly, he accelerated, passing her swiftly enough to throw her off balance. The only sound that registered in her mind at that moment was the clash of metal against metal. Looking up, she noticed Izuku's right hand crushing a small dagger, while his other hand was embedded in the ice elf's chest. She scanned the area frantically, trying to identify any other potential threats. There was no point in hiding, Izuku declared, stating that with her mana levels, he could see her clearly. Instantly, around 20 ice elves revealed themselves, their camouflage dissipating with a chilling flourish. The leader of the group rode a silvery white horse, his long white hair swirling in the cold air. It seemed there was indeed one useful individual among the rest, he remarked. Izuku narrowed his eyes, feeling insulted by the comment. And you can actually speak to us. How delightful. The elf said, reaching down to his supposed subordinate beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He wanted to introduce someone who had recognized Izuku's strength after he survived an arrow. This individual wished to challenge him in a one-on-one duel. Without hesitation, Izuku used his claws to swiftly eliminate the archer, startling the leader. He expressed that the archer had aimed to harm his sister, which was simply unforgivable. He then inquired if there was anything else the elf wanted to say or if they should begin the fight. The elf paused for a moment before a maniacal smile spread across his face, finding Izuku to be quite intriguing. Meanwhile, outside the gate, 2 S-rank heroes were locked in a tense standoff, Ryukyu, known as the Draconic Menace, and Dabi, the Fires of Hell. Though Ryukyu appeared unassuming in her traditional dress, the fierce glint in her eyes and the large talons extending from her hands instilled fear in the nearby investigator and monitoring division personnel. "What brings you to this red gate, Dabi?" she asked. Dabi threw his head back and laughed, stating that his intentions were clear. He had no interest in the gate itself, only in the individual inside it, Izuku Midoriya, the sole survivor of his brother's raiding party. He expressed his disdain for his father's indifference towards his children and how his sister was mourning their brother's death, leaving it to him to seek vengeance. "Izuku Midoriya?" Ryukyu questioned, asking about his rank. According to the agency documents, Dabi replied, he was classified as an E rank. Ryukyu shook her head, doubting that a weak E rank could have killed one of Dabi's powerful siblings. Dabi grumbled, pointing out that false rankers existed to eliminate others. Mr. Todoroki, a calmer voice interjected, belonged to Tsukochi, who explained that as a member of the monitoring division, it was his duty to oversee any S ranks from outside the country. However, he could not support the murder of anyone Dabi deemed worthy of death, regardless of their rank. "Look at you," Dabi scoffed, mocking Tsukochi's bravery. He stepped closer, asserting that with the gate closed and its boss defeated, only the small fry remained, making Izuku the only suspect in his brother's death. He noted that Izuku was not foolish enough to risk his life against a boss and knew when to escape. Tsukochi sighed, admitting that he had suspected Izuku Midoriya of a reawakening recently. However, when they measured his magical signature, it still indicated an E rank. The government documents also confirmed that he did not possess a quirk. Fortunately, the UA entrance exams had not been broadcast, keeping 𝐒𝐿𝐼𝐺's shadowy servants a secret from those outside the Red Gate. Darby grumbled, expressing his dwindling excitement about the situation. He then asked Ryukyu if she wanted to add some excitement to the night, igniting his hands with blue flames, reminiscent of their past encounters. Without waiting for a response, he launched a fiery punch. Ryukyu, however, was prepared, and her claws sliced through the air, aiming to strike the villainous hero. The remaining members of the association took cover, knowing that when S ranks clashed, it was a force to be reckoned with. An explosion of blue flames and invisible shockwaves erupted, tearing through the surrounding area. Darby chuckled, finding the confrontation quite entertaining. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 positioned himself between the two, one hand restraining Darby's fiery fist while the other held Ryukyu's wrist. His suit sleeves were torn, revealing his muscular forearms, slightly bruised from the intense impacts of two S-rank individuals. The realization of being able to halt both of them weighed heavily on him. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 exhaled in relief, acknowledging the danger of the situation. If Darby hadn't softened his blows, both of his arms would have been broken. He fixed Darby with a serious gaze, stating firmly that he could not accept such behavior while Darby was in Japan. Darby brushed off the ash from his hands, expressing indifference. If he couldn't have his fun with Ryukyu, he simply wanted a ride to his hotel. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 bowed as Darby turned away, contemplating Izuku Midoriya. He wondered what made Izuku so special to attract such attention, determined to uncover more of the boy's secrets. Izuku scowled as the elf raised his hands, one holding a dagger loosely. He recognized that this one was definitely the boss. The strike aimed at him had been effortlessly deflected. The elf, with a disconcerting smile, suggested they keep things calm. Now that the one Izuku had a grudge against was gone, perhaps they could have a conversation. Izuku demanded to know what the elf wanted. The elf introduced himself as 𝐺𝐸𝐻, bowing slightly, and asked for Izuku's name. Izuku replied that his name was irrelevant to someone who was already dead. 𝐺𝐸𝐻 chuckled, finding Izuku amusing. He dismounted his horse with ease and proposed a deal, but first wanted to understand why Izuku protected humans despite not being one himself. Izuku shook his head, realizing 𝐺𝐸𝐻 was trying to distract him. He urged 𝐺𝐸𝐻 to simply state the deal so he could refuse it and move on. 𝐺𝐸𝐻's demeanor shifted, revealing genuine disappointment. He explained that there was a constant urge within his kind to harm humans, yet he sensed something different about Izuku. Noticing Izuku's unyielding expression, he conceded that he had no longing to harm someone like him. Instead, he demanded the humans behind Izuku in exchange for sparing his life. Izuku gestured dismissively at the elf he had defeated, reminding 𝐺𝐸𝐻 that he had attacked his friend and threatened his sister. With that, a powerful aura enveloped Izuku, activating a skill that transformed his presence. Igris and the lead bear flanked Izuku, the latter growling lowly as armor enveloped him. The robed shadows, driven by their MSDR's fury, targeted the elves without needing orders. Before the elves could react, flames erupted across half the battlefield, encircling the 20 or so villains in a vortex of fire. Izuku knew the lesser elves would struggle against the flames, but he doubted it had defeated 𝐺𝐸𝐻. His suspicions were confirmed when the snowy surroundings erupted with ice, extinguishing the flames and shattering the remnants. 𝐺𝐸𝐻, tilting his head, expressed surprise at the unexpected turn of events. Izuku, crouching low, warned him to prepare for disappointment. 𝐺𝐸𝐻 accepted the challenge, but Izuku's thoughts were interrupted as Igris shielded him from danger. 𝐺𝐸𝐻's dagger clashed with Igris's longsword as he attempted to seize Igris's wrist. The ice bear was determined to prevent that, ready to strike down on the elf. 𝐺𝐸𝐻 hesitated, realizing the peril of being trapped beneath such a massive creature. That moment of uncertainty allowed Igris to gain the upper hand, forcing 𝐺𝐸𝐻's dagger into a lock against his sword. As 𝐺𝐸𝐻 was compelled to release his weapon, he remained unfazed, leaping back to avoid the impending strike. He declared that he possessed far more power than a mere blade could contain. Izuku's eyes widened as 𝐺𝐸𝐻 lifted all the snow from the ground with a single hand, creating the illusion of the forest floating for a brief moment. As the light, fluffy snow condensed into hundreds of separate points, it transformed into clear, steel-like icicles, all aimed directly at Izuku. He had no choice but to disable his armor and restore his agility to its normal state. With his skill activated, his movement speed increased significantly. Izuku pondered whether Igris and the bear were acting to eliminate the threat for his benefit or if they understood his strategy. They appeared to be working together in perfect harmony, suggesting some form of mental communication was at play. Just as this thought crossed his mind, 𝐤𝐸𝐻 mimicked the action of throwing something, sending a barrage of icy spears hurtling toward him. Izuku had barely a moment to raise his gauntlet, blocking the nearest icicle. The speed of the attack caught him off guard, prompting him to dive and roll forward, feeling the icy projectiles graze his back. He propped himself up on one knee, the green grass beneath him, and drew back his fist. With overwhelming strength coursing through him, he unleashed a powerful punch that sent a shockwave through the air, shattering the ice as if it were mere sand. However, 𝐤𝐸𝐻 was unfazed. He still had moisture in the air and ample mana to reconstruct his icy projectiles. Izuku's momentary victory was short-lived, as he stumbled back into the jaws of the ice bear and the sword of Igris. Unfortunately, Izuku's shadows were similarly affected by the wind, thrown off their mark. Igris's blade grazed his side instead of piercing his chest, while the shadow bear managed to take off a hand, leaving 𝐤𝐸𝐻 free to summon another hail of projectiles with his remaining arm. Igris and his monstrous ally dove aside, giving 𝐤𝐸𝐻 a brief respite. Had they chosen to attack, they could have inflicted serious damage before he had the chance to retaliate. However, his relief quickly dissipated as he realized he was staring down the barrel of a powerful weapon. Though he didn't know its name, he recognized the danger posed by the antimaterial rifle in Yorozu's hands. From his position behind 𝐤𝐸𝐻, Izuku shouted for her to fire. Yorozu chambered her mana-enhanced bullet, took a deep breath, and pulled the trigger. The recoil was intense, enough to injure an unprepared shooter, but Yorozu's enhanced abilities allowed her to handle it with ease. She barely moved from her spot, watching in astonishment as 𝐤𝐸𝐻's arm spun through the air, severed at the shoulder by the high-caliber round. 𝐤𝐸𝐻's previously unfazed demeanor shattered, just like his ice, unable to reform. The brief moment between Yorozu chambering the round and firing had given him just enough time to evade a shot to the chest, but it was too late. This ice elf possessed unparalleled magical abilities in cryokinetics, able to extract moisture from the air to create deadly weapons. Yet, he had one significant flaw: his intelligence. Despite his capabilities, 𝐤𝐸𝐻 found himself feeling helpless, akin to a baby ice bear. Panic set in, preventing him from forming even the simplest shapes. Turning around, he gasped as Izuku's claws dug into his chest, grasping his heart with a merciless grip. Confusion filled 𝐤𝐸𝐻 as he struggled to comprehend why he could not sense Izuku's presence. The hero's stealth faded, revealing the grim scene before him. Izuku had warned him that he had made a mistake. The light began to fade from 𝐤𝐸𝐻's glowing ice-blue eyes as he uttered a final word of confusion. With the defeat of the dungeon boss, Izuku felt a surge of power as he leveled up. Looking around, he noticed that his infantry, magicians, and other bears had already dispatched the remaining ice elves. Thanks to their teamwork, only he, Igris, the bear, and Yorozu had been necessary to defeat 𝐤𝐸𝐻. Izuku noticed the lead shadow bear panting like a dog, 𝐤𝐸𝐻's severed arm in its mouth, and he could have sworn it wore a smile. He contemplated the idea of a rank-up for the creature. With the successful rank-up, Izuku felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was tired of simply calling it bear. He mused aloud about what to name it, drawing his sister's attention. Her suggestion of Smokey caught him off guard, and he shot her an annoyed look, reminding her that it wouldn't be putting out fires. Izuku followed her instructions and looked at Igris, then back at the bear. He noticed a significant difference between them. Igris's shadow was clean and well-defined, only slightly smoky around his cape, while the bear emitted a dark, swirling mist that made it appear as if he were on fire. Izuku acknowledged the creativity but firmly stated that he would not name such an impressive shadow summon Smokey. Suddenly, a notification appeared, designating the shadow monster as Smokey. Izuku expressed his disbelief, leaving Sakura puzzled since she could not see the system messages. He decided it was time to get everyone out of the situation and nodded to Yorozu, who was waiting by the spinning gate. He asked her to take Sakura through while he had one more task to complete. Yorozu agreed but reminded him that he owed her some answers afterward. Izuku smiled and suggested perhaps a dinner, causing Yorozu to blush, realizing this was the first time he had asked her out. She remained silent, guiding Sakura and the restrained Shinji back to the real world. As they departed, Izuku shook his head with a chuckle, then focused on his task. Alone inside the gate, he approached Gitan's cold body and commanded it to arise. A notification confirmed the emergence of a shadow elf, designated as a night grade. Izuku contemplated naming the elf Gitan but found the name distasteful due to Gitan's actions. After considering various names, he settled on HYO. The newly named HYO knelt before Izuku, wearing a smile reminiscent of Gitan's, prompting Izuku to express his disdain. HYO quickly adopted a serious demeanor, allowing Izuku to relax. He noted that the other elves were weaker than the bears and knights, deciding it was not worth extracting their shadows. It was time to return home. Izuku picked up Gitan's old dagger, recognizing its A-rank rarity, and thought it would sell for a good price. Meanwhile, a member of the investigator division suggested that Ryukyu should go home, as they could keep watch. However, Ryukyu remained in place, still furious about Darby's appearance and the Red Gate. She felt she could not leave while some of her people were trapped inside. Just then, the Red Gate opened, revealing relieved faces, some in tears, as low-rank heroes emerged. Her surprise grew when she saw Yorozu dragging an unconscious and restrained Shinji. Ryukyu demanded to know what was happening with her employee. One of the survivors, a B-rank girl, raised her hands in a calming gesture, explaining that Yorozu had helped save them and that it was Shinji who had attacked. Ryukyu's anger intensified, and her skin began to shift, taking on a scaly appearance. She demanded answers from Yorozu, struggling to comprehend how one of her promising A-ranks could falter under pressure. Izuku stepped out of the gate, his fur coat billowing behind him, and suggested that Ryukyu get her answers from the heroes. He took Sakura by the shoulder and Yorozu by the hand, guiding them out of the alleyway. Ryukyu was not satisfied with this response and gripped Izuku's shoulder tightly, her claws nearly piercing through his clothing. She introduced herself as Ryukyu, the S-rank hero and head of the Dragon Guild. Izuku felt a pang of guilt as he spoke to one of his heroes. Ryukyu, a member of the top 10 heroes, was someone he admired greatly, but he could sense the exhaustion radiating from Sakura and Yorozu beside him. He didn't want to burden them any further. Ryukyu took a deep breath, attempting to release the weight of the emotions that had been pressing down on her for hours. She expressed her regret, acknowledging the stress she had been under recently. Understanding her struggle, Izuku's demeanor softened. He apologized as well, emphasizing that Sakura and Yorozu needed rest. Ryukyu nodded in agreement. Once they had departed into the night, she felt her body relax. She reflected on her earlier feelings of tension, realizing that she had been on the verge of violence but recognized the cost of such a confrontation. She called over an employee who was not affiliated with the association, instructing them to recruit the man she had encountered within the week, assuring them of her full support. Izuku settled onto the couch next to Yorozu, who had just fallen asleep. He was ready to share his story, the tale of how he had grown stronger. Yorozu's eyes widened with wonder as she took in the system displays around her. The system had sensed her curiosity and allowed her to perceive it as Izuku did. He concluded his story, trying to gauge her reaction. In awe, Yorozu marveled at the information displayed before her, expressing her disbelief at the existence of such a phenomenon. She inquired if there was a limit, or a level cap to this power. Izuku admitted he didn't know. She then pondered the possibility of him continually growing stronger without end. Izuku nodded in affirmation. Her excitement was palpable as she realized the potential for him to become the strongest hero in the world. She then expressed her feelings about the darker aspects of his abilities, questioning if he was troubled by the implications of bringing back the dead or the necessity of taking lives. Yorozu looked at him with a hint of exasperation, affirming that he was still the same person she had known before the system changed everything. She took his hand, trying to suppress her blush, and acknowledged the changes in him while affirming her feelings. She declared that he was still the person she liked. For a moment, Izuku sat in stunned silence, processing her bold admission. He had always sensed her feelings, but hearing her confess was overwhelming. He had never considered himself attractive, having dealt with insecurities throughout his teenage years, compounded by Bakugo's relentless teasing. The silence stretched on, leaving Yorozu anxious and fidgeting in her seat, worried about his reaction. She quickly apologized, fearing she had been too abrupt. Izuku, perhaps too emphatically, reassured her that it wasn't too sudden. He reciprocated her feelings, admitting that he liked her too. Her surprise was evident as she sought clarification, wondering if he meant as a friend or something more. Izuku struggled to contain his laughter, careful not to wake Sakura, who had already been disturbed. He confirmed that his feelings were indeed more than just friendship. Instantly, Yorozu relaxed, collapsing back onto the couch with a sigh of relief. She then drifted into unconsciousness, her grip on Izuku's hand loosening. Raising an eyebrow, Izuku chuckled at the situation, contemplating whether he should be impressed. He stood up, gently adjusting her position to ensure she wouldn't slide off the couch during the night. He retrieved a blanket from his bed and carefully draped it over her, knowing it would provide her with comfort as she slept peacefully. Izuku felt the weight of exhaustion as he rubbed his eyes and glanced at the clock, realizing it was already past 5 in the morning. Without hesitation, he crawled onto his mattress and closed his eyes, quickly drifting off to sleep. Ryukyu leaned back in her creaky office chair, trying to unwind after a particularly stressful day. However, the persistent ringing of her phone interrupted her much-needed relaxation. She answered the call with a growl, her patience wearing thin after 2 hours of dealing with reporters regarding the Red Gate incident. Hawk's smooth voice came through the receiver, teasing her about her mood. Despite her irritation, she managed a tentative smile upon recognizing him. She was not in the mood for jokes and urged him to get to the point. He chuckled lightly, acknowledging her seriousness, and mentioned he had important information regarding his recent findings in Korea. Ryukyu felt a surge of energy as she leaned forward, eager to hear more about his discoveries. She was surprised to learn that Japan had contacted South Korea's agency association with a significant request. Her shock deepened when Hawks revealed that Japan had only asked for a consultation with any heroes who had experienced the Shai Hasaikai raid. She felt a mix of frustration and curiosity, recalling the devastating incident from 4 years prior when the 5th S-rank gate opened on Jeju Island. The aftermath had left the island in ruins, with only stone spikes visible from above. The villains that emerged from that gate were not numerous but were among the most formidable they had ever faced. Their power rivaled that of the first S-rank gate's boss, a dragon that had wreaked havoc on the west coast of America. Ryukyu and Hawks had assisted the Koreans during the final raid, an experience that had been both unique and harrowing for them. It was their first encounter with an S-rank raid and the first time they had faced a near-death situation. She expressed her disbelief that Japan would consider launching another raid, emphasizing the futility of approaching the island again. Hawks, however, revealed that a Nomu-type villain had washed up on Japan's coast 2 days prior. Although it was dead, its body showed signs of modification. Ryukyu's heart sank as she listened to him explain that the autopsy had revealed gills and insectoid wings had been artificially grafted onto the creature. She struggled to comprehend how such modifications were possible, given that any technology on the island should have been long gone. Hawks explained that Japan wanted to eliminate whatever was causing these augmentations before they became too advanced, warning that if they waited, the threat would escalate. Meanwhile, Izuku found the next 4 days to be agonizing. Even though he anticipated his acceptance letter, thanks to All Might's comment about his high scores, anxiety gnawed at him. Adding to his unease was the absence of Yorozu. After the Red Gate incident, he awoke to find the couch she had been sleeping on empty and the apartment devoid of her presence. He wondered if she felt embarrassed about her confession or his response. Though he had her number, he hesitated to send any of the messages he had drafted. Despite Sakura's persistent encouragement for him to take action, he remained reluctant. Snapping back to reality while seated on the couch where Yorozu had rested, he noticed Sakura stealthily approaching the front door, her backpack slung over her shoulder. He playfully reminded her to be home by 5, warning her that her shadow might come to get her. Sakura shook her head, delivering a practiced glare that could rival her mother's. She expressed her frustration, stating that he was worse than their mom. He pointed out that she was the one who had chosen to sneak into a C-rank raid. With a huff, she demanded to know what he had done to her friend. He responded, clarifying that he was referring to the one who had been selling fake beginner's licenses. Standing up, his eyes glinted with a mischievous light as he claimed he had merely given her a scare, something that a little therapy could resolve. In truth, Izuku had simply reported her to the principal, who had a knack for scaring children out of foolishness, often leaving them shaken. However, he was not lying about Sakura's shadow. After considerable practice and experimentation, Izuku discovered he could send his own soldiers into another's shadow, allowing him to track them and ensure their safety if needed. 𝐻𝑦O, 𝐒𝐿, and 𝐒𝐿 were vital members of his army. Instead of granting her one powerful shadow, he provided her with 5 infantry and 5 ice bears. Together, they were more than capable of handling any B ranks that dared to threaten the Shadow Monarch's little sister. C ranks were insignificant compared to the newly leveled knights and bears. As he pondered what to do for the day, Izuku opened his inventory, searching for something interesting. After a sleepless night, he had set out on a cold, dark run when the clock struck midnight, leaving him without a clear purpose for the day. He considered selling Gitan's old dagger at an auction to see its worth. His fingers glided over the inventory icons until they halted at a gleaming white key, adorned with golden strand-like patterns. Item: the world above key item class, S-type, key. This key allows the creation of an instance dungeon, usable just outside the Endeavor Agency. He recalled holding back from using it earlier due to his low level, but now he thought it might be worth a try. With a half-stone still in his possession, he felt there was minimal risk involved. Even from 50 feet away, he could sense the heat radiating from the Endeavor Agency. He wondered if it was his sense stat or if the building was genuinely that hot. If it was the latter, he could only imagine the discomfort of sitting in a sweltering office all day, hoping they had air conditioning. Activating stealth, Izuku casually crossed the street, retrieving the beautifully crafted marble key from his pocket. He prepared to move it into the air just before the agency doors, but an overwhelming pressure halted him. The doors swung open, revealing a blazing Endeavor. It became clear to Izuku that the metal door bore scorch marks, likely from the hero's previous forceful exits. Still cloaked in stealth, Izuku remained invisible, but Endeavor paused, scanning the area in confusion, sensing another strong presence nearby. A woman with fiery hair inquired about their next move, prompting Endeavor to respond. However, he suddenly felt the presence vanish and decided to proceed. Izuku let out a sigh of relief as he slipped through the gate visible only to him. Although he had grown significantly stronger thanks to the red gate, he was still far from the level of an S-rank and preferred not to imagine what would happen if someone attempted to sneak up on the number 2 hero. His body relaxed further upon seeing the pearly white gates before him, resembling a vision of heaven. Looking down, he noticed his feet resting on a solid layer of clouds. Warning, don't blink. He questioned the meaning of the warning, but before he could finish his thought, he defied the system's orders and briefly closed his eyes against the blinding light. Pain shot through his back as he was propelled forward, crashing against one of the gate's unyielding bars. He landed on his now sore back, groaning as he rolled over, scanning the room for the source of his discomfort. His eyes fell upon 5 angel statues scattered throughout the space. They remained motionless, but Izuku knew from experience that statues could be deceptively dangerous. The skill known as appearance befitting a ruler activated without delay. Without hesitation, he propelled himself toward the nearest statue, drawing back his fist as he approached its imposing form. The skill overwhelming strength activated, and a gust of wind and pressure blurred Izuku's vision. He sensed something was amiss, feeling an ache in his knuckles. There was no give, no moment of resistance. He faced a solid, unyielding figure. This situation felt wrong to him. He quickly turned to see that the statues had shifted, now encircling him in a perfect formation, their stances unchanged. Suddenly, Izuku was sent flying again, unable to grasp the source of the strikes. It felt as though he had been struck in multiple places at once. Realizing he could not confront these beings alone, he summoned his allies, commanding them to come forth. 𝐒𝐿, 𝐻𝑦O, and 𝐒𝐿 were the first to appear, positioning themselves protectively between the statues and their liege. Izuku coughed, feeling as if he might lose his breath, instinctively glancing down. In that fleeting moment, the sounds of battle filled his ears. When he looked back, he saw 𝐼𝐺RIS with his sword lodged in one of the statues. Initially, it seemed like luck was on their side, but he quickly understood that 𝐼𝐺RIS had not pierced the statue. Instead, his sword was ensnared within it. With considerable effort, 𝐺RIS strained to free his weapon, but it remained stuck. As Izuku approached to inspect the statue, the other 4 angels vanished from his sight, and the sounds of combat erupted once more. He couldn't help but divert his attention from 𝐺RIS's struggle, noticing that the other angels were frozen mid-battle, engaged with his shadows. When he returned his gaze to 𝐺RIS, who had finally retrieved his blade, a realization dawned on him. They only moved when he wasn't watching. This meant he needed to retreat into the cover of his shadows, trusting in their capabilities. Once concealed by his army, Izuku closed his eyes, the sounds of clashing weapons echoing around him. If he were to be honest, it was a profoundly unsettling experience. Being unable to see the battle unfold, unaware of his mana level, and uncertain of when the next strike might land on him was daunting. For a grueling 10 minutes, Izuku remained still, relying on his sense stat to gauge his surroundings. He could feel 𝐺RIS's presence as he battled, a statue. It was a being unlike anything he had encountered before, abstract and incomprehensible, yet his shadows dispatched them as they would any other foe. Then, silence enveloped the battlefield. Izuku opened his eyes to see his army kneeling before him, the statues and their remnants vanished. The only evidence of their existence was 2 small items held in 𝐺RIS's hands as he presented them to his liege, marking the conclusion of the battle and solidifying Izuku's trust in his comrades. He received notifications of his achievements. He had leveled up. He had leveled up again. And once more, he had leveled up. One item was an angel's demonic wing, classified as an S-rank broadsword with an attack power of plus 120. Crafted from the unbreakable feathers of the heavenly guardians, this sword would never shatter. Its active skill, Paralyzing Storm, allowed the user to shed its outer layer of finely sharpened feathers, sending up to 60 at once to immobilize enemies for a brief PRD. The second item was the World Above Key, classified as an A-rank key that opened the gates of the Heavenly Palace. Its attributes included a level of 65, strength of 133, vitality of 100, agility of 148, intelligence of 150, and sense of 127. His mana stood at 3,259 out of 3,259, and his HP was 20,134 out of 20,134.